car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel-good car buying, all in one place.
Carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
Straight ahead on Bloomberg Day Break Europe, on DAB Digital Radio London, Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington DC, Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM Channel 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Now, a very good morning from London. Happy Friday. I'm Roger Hearing.
And I'm Naira Chahij. Good morning, everyone. It's coming up to 8:01 a.m. in London, 9:01 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Happy Friday. Interesting end to the week, Roger. In Europe, the focus is very much on the recovery fund. Questions over whether the rally that we've seen in European equities, whether that can continue, because there's been a lot of optimism built into these markets on that fiscal stimulus. Some analysts pouring cold water on the bullishness that's pushed European equities to a one-month high.
Yeah, it's an interesting moment, of course, for Europe more generally because of the sense of whether or not this agreement will go through, this plan that's very much touted at this summit. The first summit where leaders have met face-to-face, really, since the virus began. But we're hearing this morning from the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, that perhaps there's no more than a 50% chance that will go through, and I think the markets will certainly respond to that.
Yeah, the only thing I would say to counter that is that investors in Europe are used to things in Brussels taking a while. So if it turns out that this weekend is a little bit disappointing, it's possible that we won't see a big reaction because there'll be an expectation that something will be eventually agreed. But yes, as you say, it will be very interesting to see what comes out of that.
Yeah, indeed. And the other big story, of course, here today, very much in Britain, is that issue about the Russians spying on the lab, spying on the places where they're trying to develop a vaccine. This is what the Foreign Secretary here, Dominic Raab, has been saying. Also suggestions it's happening in Canada and the US, and here in the UK also, that maybe the Russians were involved in trying to fix the 2019 election. Now, there's a key report on that, long held back, going to come out next week because the Intelligence Committee of MPs here has finally managed to sort itself out. The publication will come, and who knows what will come out of that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Also, we were talking earlier this week, Roger, about the underperformance in tech stocks in the US, and we certainly have seen tech stocks take a little bit of a hit in the past 24 hours. Netflix, quite a big part of that in terms of looking at after-hours trade, but generally, we have seen some underperformance in the Nasdaq with questions over whether that tech dominance can continue. The ratio between big tech and small caps is the highest since the dot-com boom and bust. More broadly in the markets, 3 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe. Not getting a huge amount of direction. There is a little bit of optimism. We closed lower yesterday. The Stock 600 up 0.2% right now. Taking a look across regional equity benchmarks, you're seeing the FTSE 100 flat, the CAC 40 flat, the DAX edging into the green, up 0.3%. The IBEX goes nowhere. The FTSE MIB edges into the green as well. We really did see a tightening in those BTP Bund spreads yesterday following Christine Lagarde's press conference and the ECB decision. Taking a look at US futures, they're positive now. They weren't so positive in some of the Asian session. Dow futures up 0.1%, S&P futures up 0.25 percentage point. Nasdaq futures lead though, up 0.7%, so outperforming there in terms of the futures. If we take a look across other markets, so although it looks a little bit risk on in equities, the 10-year yield is slipping a basis point to a 60 handle. The 10-year Bund yield is unchanged at negative 46. The 10-year gilt yield goes nowhere at 14 basis points. In terms of FX markets, taking a look at the Bloomberg dollar index, right now that's trading just a touch weaker after strengthening yesterday. And then oil markets also looking a little bit weaker. WTI down 0.2% at 40.67. Brent at 43.22, down 0.4%. Roger.
Right, let's have a look at what the stocks are to watch this morning. Bloomberg's Teresa Elizabeth Pushka joins us down the line from London. So good morning to you. Now, first of all, of course, we are seeing the results coming in from the big Scandi banks. Nordea, they've set aside a much bigger loss provision than expected.
And then oil markets.
Yes, so Nordea, the biggest Nordic bank, has surprised with much bigger loan loss provisions than expected. So there we see a bank taking a more cautious approach to avoid write-downs in the second half of the year. This again also highlights the different approaches we've seen banks take in this earnings season really to those loans. So earlier this week, DNB and Handelsbanken both reported small impairments and bigger profits than expected. On interest income, Nordea had a slight miss, but the CEO sounded fairly upbeat about the future, saying he sees Nordic economies picking up again following the initial virus hit, and that he also sees little need for loan loss provisions in the second half. So mixed news here, see rather down ever so slightly.
Right. And Danske also, of course, around. Now, they trounced estimates for profit as their loan losses plunged.
So yeah, Danske, we had a results beat there, both on income and lower impairments than expected, with the CEO saying that they saw a rebound in lending activity. Similarly, I guess for Nordea, Danske also said they do not expect to book many more impairments for the rest of the year. Danske, however, also warned of further staff cuts to come as it tries to keep costs down. Now, Danske has been called up on this by about 2%. And I see, they're up a healthy 4.5% onwards.
Right, and finally, Partners Group. Now, they're said to be nearing a deal to buy Bridgepoint's Rovensa. So how are they looking this morning?
Yeah, so big news out there this morning. Partners Group says to near the deal to buy Bridgepoint for Rovensa for potentially over €1 billion. A deal could be announced as soon as today. You know, Rovensa is an Iberian crop protection company. It manufactures products such as herbicides, but also nutritional ingredients. Interesting to note here is that Bridgepoint has bought the company for about €450 million in 2016 and had to delay the Rovensa sale process earlier this year on the virus. So really all eyes up here to see if this deal comes through today.
Right, indeed, and their shares actually barely moved this morning, down 0.3%. Thanks very much to Teresa Elizabeth Pushka there with stocks to watch this morning, Nara.
Back to our top stories, Roger, and the UK, US and Canada say Russian intelligence is hacking international research centres that are racing to develop a COVID-19 vaccine. They claim several organisations worldwide are being targeted, including research institutes and labs in Britain. Here's the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab.
I think that's pretty appalling, I have to say. At a time where the world's coming together, we're all trying to find a vaccine that both our people and people around the world can benefit from. To have the Russian government engaged in that endeavour, I think needs calling out, and I think the world should know it.
Raab also accused Russia of trying to meddle in December's general election. The Kremlin has rejected both accusations.
Meanwhile, to prepare for the ongoing threat of the virus pandemic, NHS England's been given another £3 billion to prepare for a possible second wave. Boris Johnson is also going to pledge, when he speaks later, to have the ability to carry out 500,000 COVID-19 tests a day by November.
Just to note, Roger, that there's a number of sell-side analysts seeing a perfect storm in the UK prompting more BOE actions. You've got Goldman Sachs saying that policymakers may signal in August that interest rates could turn negative. Bank of America Global Research expects the BOE to cut the rate to zero as unemployment worsens and the inflation outlook weakens. And RBC says the central bank could be forced to take borrowing costs negative as early as November. Now, meanwhile, the pledge on testing comes a day after England's Chief Scientific Advisor Patrick Vallance and Health Secretary Matt Hancock acknowledged the testing.
Good morning, everybody. Let me show you what basically you can see on the screen. By the way, welcome to our live trading session. You can copy our trades, follow us for free. You don't have to pay anything at all. You can use your own broker to copy our trades. So basically, you have to use your brokerage account. Right. You will see only one screen of our trade station. We will trade live during the day. All these pairs: Japanese yen, British pound, Canadian dollar, euro, and Bitcoin. Every time when we see that basically the trade will be profitable, our strategy will generate buy signal. So we will comment live that we placed an order. So you can place order as well, or you can purchase the strategy from us, and you can see what kind of indicators, what kind of strategy we use in order to find the profitable trade, and you can use on different pairs, stocks, all other instruments, mostly derivatives instruments, because we're trading on margin that will make you profit. So welcome to SG Trader again.
Late in the quarter has spared Daimler from losing as much money as analysts were expecting. The maker of Mercedes-Benz cars reported a preliminary deficit of 1.68 billion euros before interest and taxes for the second quarter. The company says business is returning unevenly, with car sales in Europe coming back more slowly than in Europe more slowly than in North America or China. And let me read you the 1.47% up is their current share rate.
Those are your top stories for the latest in global news. Here's Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Naira, and thank you. U.S. infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci says many states there reopened too quickly. This as Florida and Texas report record numbers of coronavirus deaths. Elsewhere, Manila may return to a lockdown as virus cases rise over in the Philippines. Brazil, meanwhile, has gone over 2 million cases as the virus spreads in the country's poorer, remote areas. Now, crossing over to Europe, Sweden's Prime Minister Stefan Löfven is defending the country's controversial approach to tackling the pandemic. Bloomberg's Niklas Rolander has the story.
Löfven said he's still completely convinced that it was right to avoid a strict lockdown, despite Sweden having much higher death rates than neighboring countries. However, the country's public health agency warned this week that large parts of the population remain susceptible to infections, as only a minority have developed antibodies to the virus. In Stockholm, Niklas Rolander, Bloomberg Day Break, Europe.
Now, in other news, U.S. Attorney General William Barr has accused major U.S. companies of becoming pawns of China. He said they have enabled Beijing to gain influence and wealth at the expense of the Western democratic values. He singled out companies like Microsoft, Apple, and Walt Disney. Crossing over to the UK, the Court of Appeal has ruled that a woman who was stripped of her citizenship by the government after she joined Islamic State can return to fight her appeal. Bloomberg's Laura Joffrey has more.
Shamima Begum was born in the UK. In 2015, she was still a teenager when she fled to Syria, where she married an Islamic State fighter. Last year, she was found by journalists in a Syrian camp. This is when Sajid Javid, then UK Home Secretary, decided to remove her British nationality. She appealed this decision, and on Thursday, judges in London ruled that she can't have a fair trial unless she returns to the UK. The British government said it is bitterly disappointed by the decision and will appeal. In Manchester, Laura Joffre, Bloomberg Day Break, Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. Coming up on the show, Morgan Stanley has joined the wins for Wall Street, reporting record profits by capitalizing on the Fed's extraordinary rescue measures. We wrap up the week of U.S. bank earnings next. And in terms of how the markets are looking in Europe, we end the week on a little bit of a positive note. The Stock 600 higher by 0.2%. This is Bloomberg.
Y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Sherry Ann.
Peru is actually the world's #2 miner of copper, and it's now working its way back from a 2-month shutdown because of the coronavirus. The CEO of Miner Buenaventura and head of the local Institute of Mining Engineers says the country's mines should be back to full production by the end of July. Victor Gobitz also gave his outlook for metals prices, starting with gold.
We have a very good perspective for gold in this year because we expect that the entire world will face this uncertainty, and definitely gold is saving heaven in this respect.
Do you expect it to stay at that $1,800 per ounce level that it's at right now?
Yes, we expect that at least during this 2020 year. Yeah, definitely, because when you see all the information, the vaccine is not coming yet, probably in 2021.
What about copper prices, the highest in 2 years right now? What's your price outlook?
Yeah, in general, in the long term, from the long-term perspective, we are very, very optimistic regarding the copper price. But in the short term, definitely there is a significant impact related to Chile.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at Bloomberg QuickTake. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning, I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Business Flash, and we are seeing European stock markets continued the mixed trading day that we saw in Asia this morning as investors digest a set of disappointing Netflix earnings that have raised some questions about the tech rally in the US. So to that end, the CAC 40 is currently flat. We're seeing the Stock 600 and the FTSE up just 0.2, the DAX gaining 0.4%. US futures currently in the green, but we did see Japanese equities close lower earlier this morning. The Hang Seng still trading and currently up 0.7%. If we look at a couple of stock specifics, Swedbank gaining more than 4%, Ericsson up 7%. Both Swedish stocks had earnings out this morning. Swedbank and Ericsson both surprising to the upside. Treasuries are currently down a basis point for the 10-year yield at 61 basis points. 10-year bund yields holding at -46. 10-year gilt yields at 14 basis points. In currency markets, the yuan fixing is back at that 7 handle. Otherwise, the Aussie and Kiwi dollars are bid, but G10 currencies fairly range-bound. We're seeing the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down 0.1%, the yen at 107.2, sterling at 125, the euro at 113. Gold is trading just below $1,800 a troy ounce, and oil slightly weaker with WTI at $40 a barrel, Brent at 43. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Len Garens with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. The UK has warned that Russia is seeking to steal coronavirus vaccine research. Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre says facilities in multiple countries have been targeted by a group which is almost certainly part of Russian state intelligence. Security agencies in the US and Canada later backed up those findings. Now, India has become the third country to record at least 1 million coronavirus cases. The virus curve there didn't flatten despite imposing an expansive lockdown in March. Only the US and Brazil have had more cases. India's population is more than double those two combined, suggesting the virus has more room to run. And in the US, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's confident Congress can pass another virus relief plan in the coming weeks. Democrats have called for $3.5 trillion more spending as the coronavirus continues to rage across the country. Pelosi says Republicans have already shifted position to agree that at least $1 trillion extra relief is needed. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now, Morgan Stanley has joined the wins for Wall Street, reporting record profits. Total trading surged 73%, beating expectations amid wild market swings caused by the coronavirus. CEO James Gorman told Bloomberg the bank had a strong corporate strategy going into the pandemic, but now the economic outlook looks uncertain.
For the economy, it's very hard to tell. I mean, it depends on, how quickly the COVID outbreak that we're seeing across the South and Southwest subsides, how well people coming back to their place of work functions, continued liquidity and stability in the market. So it's too early to tell.
For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Danny Berger. So we seem to be continuing the theme here, Danny. Great to have you with us, of trading really being the reason that banks are doing better than expected.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Morgan Stanley results, you can hear the CEO there. He did during the call and in the Bloomberg interview really was not afraid to toot his own horn. The bank didn't have to take big provisions. He said that that's not by luck, that's by design. So it ended up being the best quarter on record for both profits and revenue. Traders posting a whopping $5.5 billion in revenue. That's an increase of about 68% from a year ago. Investment banking also had a strong quarter. So again, as you say, Nara, this is the trend we've been seeing, the more volatile markets helping the banks here. And then in terms of the outlook, the question still remains, can that continue through the rest of the year when we have seen markets start to level off since then? But it really helped these banks have quite an impressive quarter given what the rest of corporate America is expected to look like this earnings season.
Yeah, Danny, what about the provisions, though, that was set aside? What does that tell us?
So banks set aside about $35 billion for bad loans. It is a gigantic figure, and it comes in contrast to what actually happened on the ground. And this is sort of the weird environment we find ourselves in. Things actually didn't look that bad, or at least as bad as you'd expect them to look with an 11% unemployment rate. You had loans falling into delinquency actually lessened this year. People who deferred payments on credit cards and mortgages, they sent in checks anyway. But what those big loan losses reflect is an environment where banking executives just really don't have a clue what the environment is going to look like down the road, what coronavirus infection rates are going to look like, what unemployment is going to look like. Citigroup, they're estimating a 10% unemployment rate. That's what they modeled their provisions on. JP Morgan used a 20% unemployment rate. That was in some part just to show their investors, their shareholders, that they could handle a tougher environment. But in some ways, this might be a lesson from 2008, because when they started to set aside write-offs for more bad mortgage loans, they said the worst is over. And of course, we know from history that was cataclysmically wrong.
Yeah, and Danny, Bank of America is often seen as well as a bellwether for the American consumer. So what narrative emerged from their consumer division?
So Bank of America actually, I think, added to the ambiguity of the picture of the American consumer. The lender's provisions for bad credit came in about half as much as the other firms. They actually sounded quite optimistic. The executives spent much of the reporter call defending those figures, saying that they had less exposure to harder hit industries and they started to focus more on wealthy clients. So this is certainly a turn in the narrative from Bank of America when we say, okay, this is the bank that's most exposed to the consumer, to the lender, but even the consumers they did have, they said that they were holding up. And again, Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, really sounded more confident on this call than I've heard any of these executives sound. A lot of the other banking executives have said it's really hard to predict how things will shake out, what happens when the stimulus wears off. But Bank of America insisted that the quality of their loan books was strong, that the stimulus programs haven't made it difficult to assess creditworthiness, and they were confident, really confident. Of course, that didn't help share prices. They still declined, and much of that has to do with lower interest rates that hurt their margins and income.
Danny, thanks so much. Danny Berger there, bringing us up to speed on what's been going on with US banks. Next, we're going to talk about Britain, the United States and Canada and their claims over Russian cyber spies trying to find out about vaccines. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Economists think consumers are feeling more upbeat, although high unemployment does pose a risk to sentiment. The University of Michigan's first look at July consumer sentiment comes out after the opening bell. The housing market seems to be faring better than other sectors of the economy, and the forecast for new home construction calls for an increase in June. The government's report on housing starts should be boosted by record low mortgage rates. Freddie Mac's average for 30-year loans fell below 3% for the first time this week. Could be a rough day ahead for Netflix after its forecast for third-quarter subscriber growth disappointed investors last night. Second-quarter gains beat expectations as more people stuck at home signed up. Stocks begin the day with the Dow and S&P 500 higher for the week and the Nasdaq in the red. There was some upward momentum as trading ended, with the market reversing some of its earlier losses. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
Reopening. The reopening rotation that's taken place. How will it happen?
Healthcare is obviously very much in focus.
What's next?
Surely it's better to have an extension.
What if?
This is going to be industry-wide.
At least there's one question you can have answered. Where to keep up?
We have the latest world and national news.
Right here.
This departed from a policy he had long had.
This is about people that you care about.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Office sanitation is more important now than ever. Disinfectants alone won't do the job because they only work per application, exposing surfaces to recontamination. BioShield Matrix is a surface coating with an antimicrobial additive that continuously kills coronavirus and harmful pathogens to create a safe work environment. BioShield Matrix is non-toxic, easy to use, and will not stain or bleach your surfaces. One application for 90 days of proven protection. Do you have the Matrix? BioShieldMatrix.com.
Running a business can be tough. Bright HR's award-winning people management software makes things simple and straightforward, getting you back to business and your employees safely back to work. You can view your home, office and on-site staff hours with our location clocking in system, monitor holidays, sickness and furlough, and our insurance-backed HR advice can protect you against employment tribunal claims. Now is the bright time. Sign up for your free demo at brighthr.com.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Ever wondered how people's postcode lottery works? Easy. Your postcode is your ticket. And every weekday it gives you the chance to win £1,000 or £30,000 every weekend. And every month players in your postcode could win a share of £3 million. Join in at postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 23rd of July to play in the August draws. PPL manage lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus. Conditions apply. Play responsibly.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So, you've been holed up for a while.
Not in here!
The place has got a little, let's say, lived in. At Wix, we'll create your dream kitchen or bathroom from design to show off ready. And to keep everything safe, you can book a free virtual design appointment. Plus, now there's up to 50% off showroom kitchen units. Cure your house embarrassment safely with Wix. For more offer details, see wix.co.uk.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB Digital Radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Day Break Europe.
8:30 a.m. in London, 9:30 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Good morning, everyone. I'm Naira Chehich.
And I'm Roger Hearing, and you're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Roger, we're 30 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe. Earnings season is certainly getting underway, both in Europe and across the pond in the US. Today, we're actually not getting much direction for European stocks right now. They started in the green, but they've given up a lot of the gains. So the Stock 600 trading pretty much flat right now. The FTSE 100 treading water. The CAC 40 edging into the red. The DAX still stays positive, up 0.3%. The IBEX down 0.6%. The FTSE MIB is flat. We saw some weakness in US equities yesterday, and a theme of the week has been underperformance in the NASDAQ after 5 weeks of outperformance. Of course, Netflix causing some concern overnight. US futures are positive, though. Dow futures, they're actually flat now, but S&P E-minis are up 0.2%, and NASDAQ futures actually outperforming, up 0.8%. In terms of bond markets, the 10-year Treasury yield slips a basis point to a 60 handle. It's a big weekend for European investors and for Europe in terms of the EU Recovery Fund. We did see yesterday BTP yields drop quite significantly following the ECB news conference from Christine Lagarde. Right now, 10-year BTP yield unchanged on a 118 handle. The 10-year Bund yield also goes nowhere at negative 47, but we could perhaps see some reaction in these bond markets on any disappointment from discussions in Brussels. The 10-year gilt yield is steady at 14 basis points. The dollar heading for a third weekly loss, which speaks to some of the recent risk appetite in markets. We are seeing a little bit of dollar weakness today as well, with commodity currencies, Aussie and Kiwi, outperforming. But interestingly, the yen also outperforming somewhat in G10. And then taking a look at oil, slipping. We're seeing WTI down 0.9%, $40 a barrel. Brent crude at $42.94, down 1%. Some concerns over demand. The initial jobless claims data out of the US yesterday not providing a lot of hope. Roger.
Right, let's go on to some of our top stories. Now, the UK, the US and Canada say Russian hackers are attempting to steal data on the race to develop a virus vaccine. Bloomberg's Charles Capel has the story.
Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre said pharmaceutical businesses and research facilities in multiple countries had been targeted by a group known as APT-29, which they said is almost certainly a part of Russian state intelligence. The Kremlin said they had nothing to do with the hacking attempts. Security agencies in the US and Canada issued their own statements supporting the findings. British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab said the hackers were pursuing selfish interests with reckless behaviour. In London, Charles Capel, Bloomberg Day Break Europe.
Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is bracing for a second wave of coronavirus cases. He will announce another £3 billion of extra funding to help prepare the National Health Service. The PM is also due to unveil plans today to ramp up virus testing to 500,000 a day by the end of October.
And in top corporate news, Netflix shares plunged by as much as 15% after it delivered a disappointing subscriber forecast. The world's largest paid streaming service expects to sign up just 2.5 million new users in the third quarter. That's less than half the number expected by Wall Street. Netflix has also got a new co-CEO after promoting the chief operating officer, Ted Sarandos, to work alongside the current CEO, Reed Hastings.
Now, the parent of Mercedes-Benz says a late quarter recovery in demand kept it from losing as much money as expected. Daimler reported a preliminary deficit of $1.9 billion. Automakers have been decimated by the coronavirus pandemic, but Daimler says that deliveries of Mercedes-Benz have bounced back in China, hitting a record in the second quarter. Analysts were generally impressed with the cash development coming out from Daimler, and the shares today are up almost 4% right now.
Right, let's get the latest in global news from Leanne Gerrans. Leanne, good morning. You join us with what's going on with the virus globally.
Yes, indeed, Roger. Good morning and thank you. India has seen its coronavirus cases exceed 1 million, becoming the third country to cross that mark. In the US, infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci says many states reopened too quickly.
What I think we need to do, and my colleagues agree, is that we really got to almost regroup, call a timeout, not necessarily lock down again, but say we've got to do this in a more measured way.
His warning comes as Florida and Texas report record numbers of coronavirus deaths. In other news, the U.S. Attorney General William Barr is accusing major American companies of becoming pawns of China. He says they were enabling Beijing to gain influence and wealth at the expense of Western democratic values.
If you are an American business leader, appeasing the PRC may bring short-term rewards. But in the end, the PRC's goal is to replace you. Corporations such as Google, Microsoft, Apple have shown themselves all too willing to collaborate with the CCP.
The government here is planning to appeal against a decision by judges that Shamima Begum should be allowed back in the UK for a legal case. The Londoner travelled to Syria while a schoolgirl to join Islamic State with two others back in 2014. Her British citizenship was revoked last year, but the Court of Appeal says she should be able to return so she can challenge that decision. Alex Dos Santos is a human rights barrister.
This is one of those issues where if this decision by the Court of Appeal is implemented, it's going to weaken the Home Office's position overall, because there are a number of issues that, of course, are being litigated and argued over. One of them is citizenship, the other is entry, and, of course, what then happens with her.
And in the wake of the Me Too movement, sex discrimination claims have climbed to a 5-year high here in the UK. Now, law firms and corporations are expecting a similar jump in race discrimination lawsuits, fueled by the Black Lives Matter movement. Visits to the race discrimination webpage on the government's advisory service known as ACAS have more than doubled since May. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Roger.
Leanne, thanks very much for that. Now, let's go back to our top story, and the UK, US and Canada saying Russian hackers are trying to steal research into virus vaccines. The Kremlin has, of course, denied those claims. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's executive editor for international government, Rosalind Matheson, who's been following this story. Now, Ros, first of all, I suppose what this tells us more than anything is that there's a lot of geopolitics in the race for a vaccine.
Well, that's right. What it's telling us is that countries are using every means, fair and foul, to get their hands on a vaccine, which is turning this global pandemic into geopolitical competition. We're at a point of almost 600,000 fatalities from this virus, a lot of concerns about second waves, more lockdowns or renewed partial lockdowns, and really a protracted economic hit. So there's a lot of pressure on Russia as well as everywhere else to be first with a vaccine or something to secure supply once one is developed. And given the Trump administration's efforts really to essentially corner the market on every possible treatment, it's unsurprising that Russia wants to know in a way what others have got so it can reproduce it, and also to avoid doing themselves in research if others have failed in experiments already. There have been calls by some countries to make sure that research and vaccines are available for all, especially poorer nations. But this is really another sign that international cooperation in the virus fight is lacking. And instead what you're seeing is the emergence of some sort of vaccine nationalism.
In terms of whether there could be any action against Russia for this, Ros, how is that looking at the moment? I know we're in early stages of the story.
Well, that's right. It's an intriguing question. Now, Boris Johnson is speaking later this morning, and it might come up there. But the question is, does the UK, which really has sort of led this charge, backed by Canada and the US, try and rally some kind of broader action, particularly maybe from the European Union? Of course, we know that Angela Merkel is already a bit annoyed at Vladimir Putin at the moment for what she says is his actions inside Germany. But then again, the sanctions that were put on Russia for the annexation of Crimea haven't really deterred Vladimir Putin, and there has been less appetite from the EU for sort of concerted penalties on Russia of late. We saw some action after the poisoning of the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal in the UK in 2018, but that wasn't really broad action. And for now, Russia's just denying it and continue to do so, and probably doesn't particularly care if there are some sort of EU sanctions that come on. But it's early days, as you say.
Now, Ros, briefly, of course, in that context, of course, it wasn't the only allegation being about the vaccine thing. The Foreign Secretary here, Dominic Raab, also talked about potential that the Russians were involved in trying to fix the 2019 election here in the UK. And we know there's a big report on that coming out next week.
Well, that's right. And, of course, this dates back to some of the documents that during the last election that were released by the Labour Party. And this sort of reflects on that. But the interesting thing in all of this, of course, that the UK seems to be out in front of many other countries in terms of pushing the agenda against Russia and also China of late. And it's telling you that Boris Johnson is really trying to set a new course for UK foreign policy post-Brexit.
Great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining Bloomberg's Executive Editor for International Government, Rosalind Mattison. Just some lines coming through from China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman saying that China opposes all kinds of cyber attacks and that some US officials are talking irresponsibly. This in response, of course, to the comments from Attorney General William Barr on Disney, Apple and other firms being pawns of China. China saying that the US claims of virus research cyber theft are absurd as well. This is Bloomberg.
First, I hold my hands out like they're on a steering wheel. Then I look over my shoulder. 1, okay, cool guy. 2, 3 times. Next, I put it in reverse. Meep, meep, meep. Then I take it up and down, up and down. And that, kiddos, is called the forklift.
Dance like a dad. It's a great way to make a moment with your kids.
Now that's dancing. Sure beats flossing.
Visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Today, nearly all business is international business. The same goes for business disputes. That's why the International Center for Dispute Resolution provides a faster, more efficient approach to dispute resolution across borders. Backed by the American Arbitration Association, the ICDR is the world's leading provider of dispute resolution services. Find out why global expertise matters. Visit ICDR.org.
The following is a message from PGIM.
Welcome to Outsea in 60, Perspectives from PGIM Thought Leaders. Here's Mark Baribeau, the head of Global Equity at Jennison Associates.
You're looking at bigger implications of technology playing a role in keeping us all connected, giving us access to information or goods very quickly. So we don't see any of those trends changing. In fact, they're likely to accelerate. There's some new things that have come along, though, that people might find useful, like telemedicine. There were skeptics about that, and I think the more people using it, especially the more doctors are using it today, the more they're liking it. You can see more patients. It can be more effective. It might actually be a better solution.
Hear more PGIM perspectives at pgim.com. That's PGIM.com. Partner with PGIM, the investment management business of Prudential. These statements are not intended to be investment advice and should not be used as the basis for any investment decision.
For the Jewish Communal Fund.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Eurotunnel-Le-Châtel is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel-Le-Châtel, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel-Le-Châtel, a safer way to France and beyond.
When you don't collect nectar points while shopping for your picnic, it can feel like you're missing something. Like your picnic is missing the P. It's like Icnic, and you're in the local Ark looking for the perfect spot to put your Icnic blanket and enjoying a glass of Prosecco while eating some margarita pizza. Make the most of your picnic. Don't miss out on a little extra with Nectar. Collect points on your shopping every day. Find our latest offers on the app.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Short on time? Don't worry. You can still get your cook on with Asda. Get 3 Asda ready meals for just £5.50. Like our beef lasagna or our tomato and mozzarella panette bake. Hang up your oven gloves. We've got dinner covered. Asda. Save money, live better. Selected stores and lines subject to availability. Meals 400 grams, £2.10 each.
What have you missed the most? A haircut? A visit to the shops?
Oh, you look lovely in that.
What about a nice lunch?
Fish and chips, please. Salt and vinegar with that.
Or an afternoon in a pub garden? Fancy a casual bike ride? Or perhaps something a little more intense? Or maybe you want a relaxing day out. Whatever you've missed, get out there and enjoy it again safely. Find out how at gov.uk/enjoy summer safely.
Nissan Sunderland factory is building cars again, and we're ready to get Britain moving. That's why this summer selected Nissan models come with a 3-month payment holiday, plus free roadside assistance, all at only 0% APR representative. We've built the cars, we've built the offers. Now it's time to get you back in the driving seat. See how we can help you at nissan.co.uk/payment holiday. And together, let's move beyond. PCP Nissan Finance. Order and register by 30th September 2020. Participating dealers only. Nissan. Innovation that excites. Make sure you don't miss out by visiting Westway Nissan.
Unpredictability. It's just part of life when you're living with a health condition. What you feel like you can do can change day to day, and that's okay. 15 of the UK's leading health charities have come together to support people with health conditions in finding ways to move more in whatever way works for you. It's the fact that we get moving that makes us feel undefeatable. For ways to move more, search We Are Undefeatable.
It's headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg QuickTake. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning, I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Business Flash, and it's a bit of a mixed trading day in Europe this morning with the Stock 600 and the FTSE both flat, the DAX gaining 0.3 and the CAC 40 lower by 0.2% this morning. US futures currently in the green, but it follows a fairly mixed trading day in Asia this morning as investors digest some concerns about the US tech rally after disappointing Netflix earnings. And a couple of stock specifics I'm keeping an eye on this morning. Swedbank higher by 3.7% after a big headline beat this morning on its income numbers. If we look at Telia as well, up 0.5% at the moment. Interestingly, after revenue came in ahead of estimates, EBITDA a significant beat coming in 6.3% higher. Now in treasuries, we're seeing the 10-year yield currently down a basis point at 60 basis points. 10-year bund yields at negative 47, 10-year gilt yields holding at 14 basis points. In currency markets, I'm keeping an eye on the yuan, the fixing back at that 7 handle. The Aussie and Kiwi dollars are bid this morning, but otherwise G10 currencies fairly range bound. The Bloomberg dollar spot index down just 0.1%, the yen at 107.1, sterling at 125, the euro at 113. Gold is trading around $1,800 a barrel, and oil is slightly weaker today. WTI down 0.7% at $40 a barrel, Brent just above 43. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Lynn Garens with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. India has seen its coronavirus cases exceed 1 million, becoming the third country to cross that mark. In the US, infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci says many states reopened too quickly. This as Florida and Texas report record numbers of coronavirus deaths. Meanwhile, Manila may return to a lockdown as virus cases rise over in the Philippines. The UK has warned that Russia is seeking to steal coronavirus vaccine research. Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre says facilities in multiple countries have been targeted by a group which is almost certainly part of Russian state intelligence. Security agencies in the US and Canada later backed up those findings. And a British satellite has taken the closest images ever of the sun. They reveal a surface dotted with thousands of tiny solar flares, which are being described as campfires by scientists. The photos were taken 480 million miles away, roughly halfway between the sun and Earth. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now let's get to our guest for the rest of the hour. And Viraj Patel, FX and global macro strategist at Cacharon, joins us down the line. Great to have you with us, Viraj. Thanks so much for joining. So a big weekend ahead with EU leaders meeting from today to discuss this massive stimulus package that's really put a rocket under the bottom of European equities for the past few weeks. A lot of sell-side analysts changing their views on European equities, citing a preference for them as a result. Would you be wanting to buy the euro on the optimism around the EU Recovery Fund?
So it feels deja vu to some extent to what the euro rally that we saw in 2017. And I think for Eurobulls, that party didn't end well. So for us, we think a lot of optimism and the good news is now priced into the euro, and potentially the risks are tilted, at least in the short term, to the downside. Either the recovery fund does not get agreed, it's highly watered down, or its implementation is way too slow to materially impact the speed of Europe's recovery. So for the euro, we're looking more for a tactical pullback against crosses that have actually rallied the most on the recovery fund optimism, so the likes of euro yen, euro dollar, where we think positioning and short-term valuation is overshot. And more broadly, I think when it comes to this euro and equity rally coinciding, we think that that's just the short-term story that doesn't really change the longer-term trajectory of the euro, which is a function of how quickly the European economy can recover from the COVID crisis.
And yet, Viraj, it's interesting with things like the Swiss franc that pairing has been perhaps less in favour of the franc than you might expect, suggesting there is at least some optimism out there, perhaps, and that natural havens like the Swiss aren't perhaps as favoured as you might think.
Yeah, particularly if we look at the trade-weighted euro index, that's at 6-year highs. And I think when we look at sort of how that ties into the ECB policy, the ECB sort of need to keep financial conditions accommodative over the next 6 to 12 months to provide support to European markets, we think that a higher euro does not fit well. So we think that any sort of move higher in the euro is going to eat into the ECB's what we call pain threshold, starting to sort of have a negative impact on sort of the recovery and in both the trade and sort of exports and what it means for inflation. So certainly I think we're wary that, a higher euro does not fit well with the rest of sort of the ECB's easing package.
What's interesting, though, is that according to people familiar with the discussions, ECB policymakers didn't agree on whether they expect to use the full amount of their 1.35 trillion euro PEP programme when they met Thursday. This was despite, of course, as you know, Viraj, Christine Lagarde subsequently saying that is likely. But it does show that there's a little bit of a disagreement within the governing council, perhaps suggesting that some are much more optimistic than others. Are you convinced, and is the market convinced, that PEP will be extended by the end of the year?
So we think the consensus is shifting towards actually the ECB doing less than more, and we think that that's actually wrong, because the risks are actually tilted that the ECB will do more, not less. So we actually think there's greater risks that the ECB expands the envelope for PEP by probably 500 billion actually later this year. So what we're not conflating is basically the comfort with a slower pace of bond purchases currently amid thin summer trading conditions, with the central bank taking the foot off the easing gas. What we're sort of saying is that we can't extrapolate what we've seen over the past couple of weeks to the rest of the year. September, October and November may be different trading conditions to what we're used to right now. So in actual fact, what we're seeing is actually QE in this time round versus 2010 and maybe the ECB's first attempts of QE it's so much more flexible. We can see bond purchases scaled up and scaled down according to market conditions. And I think that's what we should become accustomed to seeing. And I think that the risks are that we may see these be scaling up, the pace of bond purchases later this year into next year, not least because the recovery itself is likely to be drawn out and protracted.
Now, Viraj, let's move across the Atlantic. We're hearing a lot of interesting lines from various Fed speakers at the moment, and obviously we had, of course, the US jobless claims to tangle with. Are you a dollar bear yet?
I wouldn't put myself in the dollar bear camp just yet. I think, to be honest, when we look at the conditions that sort of underpin, and we've had this message before, dollar bear trends over the last 40 years, we're not there yet. And I think, especially when we look at the dollar's carry advantage across the G10 space, US short-term rates are not the lowest. And we don't think the dollar will necessarily be the go-to funding currency when we look at sort of carry plays that may emerge over the next 6 months. But I think one thing that doesn't sit well with us at the moment is the sort of underestimating the bounce-back ability of the US economy. We saw a hint of this in retail sales data yesterday in the US, and we think the consensus that the rest of the world, including Europe, will emerge quicker out of this COVID recession than the US could be challenged in the coming months. So we don't see any conviction really on either side, whether dollar bears, dollar bulls right now. Strategically, we're quite neutral on the dollar because the high-frequency data at this stage is too noisy to really make any big picture calls. But certainly in the short term, we see tacticals, as we mentioned, overshooting sort of European and high beta currencies, and also the non-negligible risk that we could start to see dollar safe haven flows returning. So it's too messy to sort of make a big strategic call on the dollar either way.
I wonder what your strategic call or tactical call on the pound is, Viraj, because a number of Wall Street economists are increasingly predicting there's going to be more action from the BOE. Money markets are pricing in a cut to zero by February. What's the pound pricing right now in terms of the BOE?
Yeah, we think that there's two growing headwinds that are likely to weigh on the pound in the short term. And I think, the first is the ever-present Brexit trade deal risks, and naturally that's going to intensify as we head in towards year-end. And we could see investors actively hedge sterling downside risks, as we've seen in episodes over the past couple of years. But the second, and the one that's really outright negative for sterling, is this sort of Bank of England rate cut story, being sort of markets bringing forward expectations for the next rate cut from early next year to potentially later this year, with an actual cut in the bank rate potentially then fueling even further bets for negative rates into 2021. So there is a risk that we see short-term UK rates falling 10 to 20 basis points in a short period of time, and that's outright sterling negative. So that coupled with sort of the Brexit headwinds, for us, we sort of see again a short-term pullback in cable to 122, 123, especially if markets begin to actively price in the narrative that the bank will shift away from QE to rate cuts as the marginal tool to providing support for the UK economy.
All right, Viraj, thanks so much for being with us. Viraj Patel there, FX and global macro strategist at Cacharon, joining us with a sense of where the dollar, the euro and the pound could be going in the near future. And a fascinating moment, in fact, of course, for the pound, not least because we are getting those lines coming from many analysts saying that they think the UK economy may not be as well balanced as perhaps it should be, and that we could be seeing negative rates from the Bank of England before too long. Coming up in the next hour of Daybreak, Caroline Hepker and Anna Edwards are going to be back, and they're going to be speaking to Callum Pickering, senior economist at Berenberg, getting a sense of what he feels, not least, of course, about that rather crucial summit today in Brussels, where European leaders are meeting to try to get that deal through to save the European area. The recovery package. Already we know that the Dutch Prime Minister, one of the frugal four, of course, is saying he thinks there's only 50% chance that a deal will come. Stay tuned for more on that. This is Bloomberg.
Who's in your...
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying, all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
Eurotunnel-le-Châtel is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Day Break Europe.
The idea is to really hold the economy in suspended animation until we get control of this virus.
We are very much in a picture of monetary dominance.
We will get slower growth. I mean, let's not get confused about that.
We are in a national crisis. I think it is for all parties to pull together.
The euro area is facing an economic contraction of a magnitude and speed that are unprecedented in peacetime.
Bloomberg Day Break Europe on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning from London. I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Caroline Hepke in for Matt Miller this week. You're listening to Bloomberg Day Break Europe live on London DAB Digital Radio. And Anna, Brazil has seen 2 million coronavirus cases, more than now. India in excess of 1 million. These hacking allegations against Russia denied by the Kremlin. But these are very desperate times. This hour we're going to be speaking to someone from the World Health Organization a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Plenty to focus on when it comes to the underlying virus story, which in part is playing into some of the geopolitics that we're seeing, some of the tensions that we see, that weighing on markets. And in the midst of all of that, we wait for news about what European leaders can agree on their bailout fund. European leaders meeting then in Brussels will be across that story for you. We've seen some of the leaders arriving, giving us a sort of mixed take on how confident or pessimistic they are about getting a deal done. With all of that in mind, then, let's check the data, Caroline. We've got European stocks down by 0.25%. The FTSE 100 down 0.3%. The Cacharon down 0.5%. The DAX fairly flat. But we do look to Brussels really for some, in the very short term, some guidance as to how optimistic we should be about burden sharing around the Eurozone. That does seem to be one of the big talking points of the day, and it'll be the political signalling that comes from Brussels around that will be interesting and either give comfort to markets or otherwise. The euro, with all of that in mind, is fairly stable this morning at 113.88. The dollar also fairly flat to negative on the dollar and the Bloomberg dollar index. A quick look at some of the other markets then for you. We've got the oil price retreating just a little bit, so the oil price down 42.93, down 1%. Raw materials in general, though, back in a bull market. I was talking to our Markets Live colleague, Eddie van der Walt, a little moment ago, and he was talking about how this is very much a supply story for raw materials in general. It's not really about demand, not about saying that, that everything's fine and we're all back to the races in terms of the global demand story. A few individual stocks for you really flying this morning over at Ericsson, the stock up by just over 8%. The telecom equipment maker, it seems that is a sector that remains fairly well cushioned from the coronavirus impact. People working from home, that boosts spending on that kind of product. We also see numbers from Daimler comforting the market, and that stock up by 3.8%. So there's some individual companies moving to the upside. Electrolux and IAG, though, move to the downside. Electrolux on the back of their earnings report. So it's sort of a mixed bag on earnings this morning, Caroline.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the about the EU leaders meeting today after the ECB's Christine Lagarde reminded leaders of the hopes and expectations that rest on them. Just a couple of moments ago, we heard some optimism from the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. Today is of utmost importance, she said. A solution is possible. For more, let's bring in Callum Pickering, senior economist at Berenberg. Callum, great to have you. Mark Rutte, though, this morning was not sounding nearly so positive. The Dutch leader seems to be the main sort of adversary or questioner of what is going on in terms of the recovery fund.
Well, okay, Mr. Rutte is one of the frugal four. He will care a lot about what conditions the fund is agreed on, especially for, and I
speaking earlier on the TV, I said that you were going to hear a lot of euphemisms for Italy this weekend. Anytime you would hear reform, structural reform, pro-growth, it's all pointed towards the Italian question. Here's an economy which needs a lot of work to improve its trend growth, improve the ability to generate tax revenues, and what some European countries are wary of is handing over lots of money to especially southern and peripheral European economies which need reform, only to find that they use up the money but don't reform the underlying economy. So that is the key issue. And when it comes to shaping expectations, I think it's fair. It's probably a little optimistic to expect a deal by the end of this weekend. I think we get one by late summer, perhaps autumn, but this weekend is too early. What matters is the communication. Are the leaders fairly happy that they have come together on key issues? Do they see some hopes for a deal? If we get that, that should be sufficient to shape some positive expectations headed into next week.
And Callum, what risk is there in better data out of Europe? Because some of it's quite mechanical. I think you or one of our earlier guests described it as rebounding European data, quite mechanical, based on what we've been through and the closure of economies and then the reopening. Does the mechanical rebound in data, is it threatening to be good enough that it puts off these leaders from doing something as sizable as Angela Merkel would like them to do?
Well, we're certainly not in a crisis scenario as we were in March and April. And you're right to describe it in a mechanical way, because in a sense, what we are doing is just switching on parts of the economy that had been previously switched on. The moment you open a shop, that represents an increase in business. The same applies to factories and construction sites. So the initial snap back is not really a genuine recovery in underlying confidence, sentiment, and spending. It's just the returning on of parts of the economy. But I think that most European leaders realize the long-term consequences of what they're about to discuss. You know, there's one element, which is the economics. Of course, if you can get a big number, it's good for the near-term European outlook. But by and large, the ECB, national economies with their fiscal policies can do enough to support the recovery. But from a political point of view, if this can be a big expression of European solidarity, I think Euroscepticism can wane a little further. We'd be much less worried about what happens in the Italian election, the French election. So the politics, in a way, is the key issue. It's not just a near-term economic question.
No, yeah, absolutely. Look, the ECB forecasters just about 6 minutes ago have released their numbers of how they see the economy. So ECB forecasters see 8.3% GDP drop in 2020 for Europe, 5.7% growth in 2021. They see unemployment rising to 9.3% in 2021. I mean, that's the other key driver really for Europe. It's how sticky that unemployment issue is, and what that means for recovery, the speed of recovery here.
We are just coming off the back of a huge recession, a historic recession across the Western world. The depth of the downturn, it was worse than anything we saw in the financial crisis. But it's happened very, very quickly. And so far the evidence is that things are snapping back a little faster than expected, especially in continental Europe. The thing that we need to worry about, and this is where policymakers come in, of course you have the near-term concerns of a second wave of the virus that could disrupt the rebound. But when you have such a big economic shock, when you create such a large number of unemployed workers, you need to worry about economic scarring. You need to worry about hysteresis in the labour market, which could lower the rate of potential growth that economies enjoy in the long run. The financial crisis lowered potential growth across the Western world. We have to watch these risks too in this downturn, and this is where policymakers come in. The faster fiscal and monetary policymakers can return economies to full employment, bring those unemployment numbers down, the faster you can get to a situation where you're back to something like normal potential growth, where you don't have that economic scarring.
Callum, thanks very much. Callum Pickering, senior economist at Berenberg.
Right, let's get over to Bloomberg's Roger Herring, who's got all the latest now in global news. Morning, Roger.
Good morning, Caroline. Let's start with fast fashion and the ethical and sustainability issues that plague the industry. That's as the UK fashion company Boohoo's suppliers were found to be paying their workers as little as £3.50 an hour to make the cheap clothing. Well, let's get more on all this from our Bloomberg Quick Take reporter, Jennifer Zabasaja. Jennifer, good morning. Now, give us a picture of how big a problem this is.
Yeah, so Roger, good morning to you. You know, these concerns about the fast fashion industry have been raised for years. But what's new now, of course, is that we're in the middle of a global pandemic. But there's also heightened awareness about structural inequality and how marginalized communities are being affected. So as it pertains to Boohoo, they've become the latest company caught in the crosshairs after reports came out that some of their facilities were underpaying workers and were putting workers in poor conditions in their Leicester garment factory. So since those reports came out, Boohoo said it dropped 2 of its suppliers accused of labor abuses and said in its independent review, it found no issues with the facilities, but still there's really a lot of ethical concerns about the rigorous turnaround of fast and cheap fashion. You know, over the past few days, we saw several investors still take a long position on the company, but some notable short sellers appear to be seeing tougher times ahead for Boohoo. So, you know what, Roger, I really suspect we will want to keep a closer eye on what investors do, but also what young and socially engaged consumers who Boohoo caters to respond, especially throughout this pandemic.
Yeah, and of course, it's not just Boohoo. We're learning about another fast fashion retailer there in the US where you are also being scrutinized. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right in the middle of, you know, another COVID hotspot here in Los Angeles County. And, you know, the spiking numbers that we're seeing here really became pretty detrimental for one clothing company called Los Angeles Apparel. They were forced to shut down all of their operations by the LA Department of Public Health for violating flagrant mandatory public health infection control. Apparel is owned by Duff Charney, which is, you know, he's formerly of American Apparel, and his company is known for basic tees. But as the pandemic worsened here in the United States, they really started ramping up their production of masks. The reason why people are talking about them now is because more than 300 of their 2,300 workers, all of them minorities, tested positive for COVID-19. 300 of their workers, 4 of them actually ended up dying. Now, Charney told me that he does feel horribly for these families, but, you know, he doesn't regret reopening, and he feels he's been unfairly targeted by a city that wasn't prepared for COVID-19. So, you know what, Charney is going to wait to see for when the city lets him reopen again. But, you know, Roger, I think this is just another example of how this pandemic is really hitting vulnerable and essential workers the hardest.
All right, Jennifer, thanks so much for that. Jennifer Zabasajja there, our Bloomberg Quick Take reporter, and you can catch all our coverage from around the world. Tune into this week's Bloomberg Quick Take show at 6 p.m. UK time tonight on Facebook and at 6 p.m. UK time on Sunday the 19th July on YouTube. Now to other news. As the virus continues to spread across the globe, the US and Asia are seeing new spikes and record numbers. India saw its infections exceed 1 million, becoming the 3rd country to cross that mark. Meanwhile, public officials across the US are threatening new lockdowns if people don't act to stop the virus. Here in the UK, England's chief scientific advisor Patrick Vallance and the Health Secretary Matt Hancock acknowledged the testing capacity needed for the winter was not yet in place. Vallance on Thursday warned that cases are likely to increase again.
There's a very high likelihood that come winter we will see an increase in cases. And I think it's quite probable that we will see this virus coming back in different waves over a number of years.
Vallance also told a committee of MPs the outcome of the pandemic in the UK has, quote, not been good. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Roger Hearing. This is Bloomberg Caroline.
Thank you so much, Roger, for that update. Great show with Jennifer Zabasajja and really good news stories to follow. Let's get you all the latest now in morning sports news, though. George Alderman on an embarrassing gap in England's cricket squad. Have a listen.
England Director of Cricket Ashley Giles says Jofra Archer could have cost them tens of millions of pounds. The fast bowler's been left out of the second test with the West Indies for breaching strict coronavirus guidelines. He left the biosecure bubble to go home to Brighton in between matches. England resumed their first innings at Old Trafford on 207 for 3 this morning. The battle to finish in the top 4 of the Premier League looks like going down to the last game of the season. Manchester United remain 5th on goal difference following last night's 2-0 win over Crystal Palace. Leicester beat Sheffield United by the same score to hold on to their place in the Champions League spots. Aston Villa's 1-1 draw at Everton means they're 3 points from safety. Southampton against Brighton was also 1-1. There's a huge match this evening as West Ham take on Watford. Both sides are just a point clear of the relegation zone.
That was the sports news. Now, the EU summit next with Ferdinando Giuliani. He joins us as Conte says that Italy's red line is efficiency of the recovery fund. We'll discuss. This is Bloomberg.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, makes innovation happen. The university helped biomedical engineering professor Tara Alvarez launch a startup that may revolutionize vision therapy.
Our startup through NJIT is called Ocular Motor Technology. We create virtual reality vision therapy in a head-mounted display. So it's gaming, and basically we're sugarcoating the therapy so that children and young adolescents don't even realize they're doing therapy. To accomplish this, we need biomedical engineers, which are here on NJIT campus, computer scientists, artists, people that are into story development, and then we're collaborating with a lot of the large pediatric medical centers. This idea of a startup culture is extremely important to not just NJIT and the National Science Foundation, but also to the U.S. as a societal whole.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
You have discovered new ways to connect with family, friends, and coworkers, and that you can do business virtually and productively. Embrace your new perspective. You can't go back to the old ways of doing things entirely. Witham can help your business thrive in this new reality with our innovative business solutions. Remote, secure, collaborative, productive. Welcome to the new normal of business. Visit Witham.com to learn how we can help you adapt and succeed. Witham.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Emily Chang.
The U.S., the U.K., and Canada are accusing Russian intelligence of trying to steal coronavirus vaccine research. This, according to the British National Cybersecurity Center. Vaccine and therapeutic sectors in multiple countries have been targeted. British authorities saying the group responsible for the hack is known as Cozy Bear and is almost certainly part of Russian state intelligence. To discuss, we are joined by Nicole Egan of Darktrace, the co-founder and chief strategy officer there. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. So what is your analysis of what exactly happened here?
As you stated, the intelligence communities have gotten together. They issued warnings originally in May that they saw early signs of this type of activity, and now they've confirmed it, and they have made attribution. As you said, they're known as Cozy Bear. They're known in cyber circles as ABT 29 as well. We've seen this group before, so this isn't the first time. We actually saw them. This is the same group with the DNC, with the Pentagon. And I think what's really interesting is trying to get at the heart of, what are they after? Clearly, the U.S. and our allies have spent in the billions of dollars already towards vaccine research. So there's clearly a lot at stake financially, economically, and, of course, about saving lives.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at Bloomberg QuickTake. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Anne Marie Horder with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. European equities are fluctuating this morning. While it did start up in the green, we are seeing most of the major indices to the downside today. The FTSE 100 relatively flat, though. The Cacharon down nearly 0.4%. The DAX, though, eking out a gain of 0.2%. Could be after Daimler had better than expected results. And that's really the tug-of-war we're seeing play out in the benchmark index, the SOX 600, which is relatively flat. We have auto parts and technology with Daimler, Ericsson reporting results higher in those, lifting those sectors higher. But oil and gas, travel, leisure, banking stocks are dragging the index lower. When you look at the New York and what's going to happen at the open, we do have S&P 500 mini futures and NASDAQ 100 mini futures to the upside. NASDAQ up 0.7%, even after Netflix plunged as much as 15% aftermarket trading yesterday. Across the currency market, we do have a weaker dollar against the cable. We are trading 1.25. Dollar yen 107.13 and euro dollar 1.13. We're closely looking at what happens in the euro dollar and European bonds as we go into the weekend. Traders are really looking to see whether or not leaders are going to get to wrap up this stimulus fund over the weekend. And when it comes to the bond market, bit of a mixed picture across the continent, though no massive moves. On the 10-year Treasury yield, we are down 1.3 basis points, 0.6%. That's a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash, and here's Roger Herring with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Roger.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. The UK's warned that Russia is seeking to steal coronavirus vaccine research. Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre says facilities in multiple countries have been targeted by a group which is almost certainly part of Russian intelligence. Security agencies in the US and Canada later backed up those findings. India has become the third country to record at least 1 million coronavirus cases. The virus curve there didn't flatten despite imposing an expansive lockdown in March. Only the US and Brazil have had more cases. India's population is more than double those two combined, suggesting the virus has more room to run. In the US, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, says she's confident Congress can pass another virus relief plan in the coming weeks. Democrats have called for $3.5 trillion more spending as the virus continues to rage across the country. Pelosi says Republicans have already shifted position to agree that at least $1 trillion extra relief is needed. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Roger Herring. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It's 9:20 in the city. Time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. We're joined by opinion columnist Ferdinando Giuliano, who's joining us to discuss the summit between EU leaders. It's kicking off in Brussels today. We've seen many of those leaders arriving already. Ferdinando, good morning to you. Some of them describing confidence and others saying they see a less than 50% chance of success at this summit. How important is it, or what are your expectations for this summit specifically?
Well, this is a very important summit because this recovery fund has been considered a step change in the way the European Union responds to common crisis, in this case the coronavirus crisis, because there would be a joint fiscal response with the EU borrowing on the market and then dishing out these funds depending on how badly a country has been hit by the shock. So coming closer to that fiscal union which people have been talking about as a necessary progression for the EU. But there are sticking points here. Main ones are the size of the fund. Initial proposal 750 billion, but the so-called frugal four, including the Netherlands, Austria and Sweden, want to reduce it. And conditionality. What do countries need to do in order to get their money, and how can governments control that the money is well spent? These are the main sticking points at the moment.
So the bottom line, I think, is this idea: will Italy have to promise / deliver reforms in exchange for this money? I mean, that's the nub of it. Will countries that most need the cash actually end up having to, offer significant concessions?
Well, I think that's part of it. It's not so much the promise, which is the problem, because I think everyone is quite good at writing on paper that they will do reform A and B. It's more whether or not you can stop giving future amounts of money if a certain country hasn't delivered on the initial promise. And who makes that call? The Netherlands are advocating that a government should, the European Council, meaning all governments, should decide in a unanimous vote whether the money can be given, which basically means that every country in the EU has a veto power over whether these grants can be given to any individual country. Others prefer some form of qualified majority, which would make it easier to sidestep a veto. But I think the crucial thing is, can you stop dishing out money over time if a country fails to make good on its promises?
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see in the context of what we all remember happened with Greece and the toxic environment in which some of those negotiations were taking place. We talked about this on this program before, about how you have some checks and balances in place, but avoid anything that's like the Troika, which did become such a loaded sort of creation around the time of the Greek crisis. How you have checks and balances, but at the same time don't make individual countries feel like their future is entirely in the hands of one or two other countries within Europe.
Well, this is a much milder form of conditionality than what we saw in Greece. There is no on-the-ground enforcement via the Troika or anything which looks like that. And anyway, the conditionality we're talking about here seems to be mainly making sure that the money is well spent, that it goes on projects, for example, some forms of infrastructure spending that agrees with, goes in line with the priorities of the European Union. Having said that, governments like Italy are pushing for very, very mild forms of control, and whereas countries like the Netherlands want something much more intrusive. So in that way, we are replicating a little bit that debate. But I think it's absolutely normal. We have a union here where there are some countries which fear the money will be wasted, and there are some countries which don't really want to have any impositions from the outside. So I think this debate goes really at the heart of the functioning of the EU and the Eurozone.
Yeah, it certainly does. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We will watch the summit, of course, as it begins this morning. Bloomberg opinion columnist Ferdinando Giuliano, thank you so much for joining us. You can read more on this and other stories from Bloomberg Opinion, bloomberg.com/opinion or OPIN on your terminal. This is Bloomberg.
With the Bloomberg Business of Sports Report, I'm Michael Barr. A former college football player and a fellow former student are suing ESPN for allegedly using audio from their viral video of a pregame hype circle in a Monday Night Football ad. Jarrell Carter, who played at Trinity International University, and Matthew Faraci, a then student filmmaker, said Gatorade had previously paid to use their video. A longtime fan of Washington's NFL team is getting online abuse after he claimed a variety of trademarks well before the team scrapping the Redskins' name came to a head. Martin McCauley has heard from his fellow fans who fear he's blocking the team from adopting a new name. McCauley says he has no intention to stand in the way of the team. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports Report. I'm Michael Barr, brought to you by Grainger. With supplies and solutions for every industry, Grainger is always there to help. Visit Grainger.com/recovery.
COVID-19. Can the world reopen for business?
Give us a sense of how you're ramping up and taking care of folks on the ground.
What's the long-term impact?
Why will we not see a V-shaped recovery?
When will there be a cure or a vaccine?
How can you model that at a time when it's unclear whether we're going to see a resurgence in viruses?
The answers will emerge.
Can you give us a sense of timing?
And you'll find them here. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part because we're all #alone-together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Not complete.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel, Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones. And you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life.
You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
When you don't collect Nectar points while shopping for your picnic, it can feel like you're missing something. Like your picnic is missing the P. It's like Icnic. And you're in the local Ark looking for the Earth-X spot to put your Icnic blanket and enjoying a glass of Prosecco while eating some margarita pizza. Make the most of your picnic. Don't miss out on a little extra with Nectar. Collect points on your shopping every day. Find our latest offers on the app.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
We've got some of your faves waiting for you on Just Eat. KFC, Burger King and Subway. Spend as much or as little as you like. No minimum spend here. We'll always deliver like a G. I mean, I would know. I'm pretty G myself, thank you very much.
Hear somebody say, Just Eat.
T's and C's apply. Selected stores and locations.
Get glowed up with Pay and Glow. All the brightest bits of O2, but without the contract. Bright bits like 6 gig of data for just £10 and unlimited minutes and texts. It's our best Pay and Glow deal yet. Plus get all the other bright bits of O2 like priority and monthly data rollover. Search O2 Pay and Glow.
£10 minimum top-up, expiry 1 month. Europe's own data only, priority 16+. Eligibility and terms apply. See o2.co.uk/terms.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Day Break Europe.
And it's 9:30 a.m. here in London. A very good morning. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Anna Edwards. It's 10:30 if you're listening in Paris or Berlin. You're listening to Bloomberg Day Break Europe.
So in the markets, Anna, it's been a strange morning. We had some gains and then losses for European equity markets. Now we're down 0.1%, but pairing some of the decline. FTSE 100 down 0.1%. Z DAX is really the only main market in the green, up 0.1%. It comes ahead, of course, of the EU summit, which is just beginning in Brussels, with leaders arriving to discuss this 750 billion euros of help for hard-hit European countries during the pandemic. As for the bond markets this morning, negative 46 basis points for Germany yields. Really not much movement in the bond markets. I think people are looking to this summit to see what happens. The ECB's Lagarde talking about how many hopes and expectations there are around this recovery fund actually getting through. We're at 14 basis points for UK gilt yields, 60 basis points for US yields, down 1.5 basis points. Speaking of which, S&P 500 E-mini futures are up 0.2%. Nasdaq futures gained 0.9%, even though we saw that big tumble for Netflix shares. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is weak at 0.1% with a drop of 0.6% for Brent crude futures and WTI crude futures this hour. Those are the markets.
Yeah, it's really notable that outperformance of Nasdaq futures, isn't it, given the what we saw from Netflix. So maybe the market is just saying, well, that was a stock-specific story. Generally, we still like tech. Let's step away from the markets briefly, Caroline, and talk about some geopolitics here. The UK, US and Canada say Russian hackers are trying to steal research into coronavirus vaccines. The Foreign Secretary here, Dominic Raab, said several organisations worldwide are being targeted, including research institutes and labs in Britain. He's also accused Moscow of meddling in December's election. The Kremlin has rejected both accusations. For more, we're pleased to be joined now by Christopher Granville, a former British diplomat in Moscow and now managing director at TS Lombard. Christopher, great to speak to you. So, were you surprised to hear the...
Okay, I'm placing an order to sell short Japanese yen. The price is 107.165. Right here, okay?
The British and other Western governments to publicise them. This is all part of the intelligence ritual As the famous quote in that film Casablanca put it, I'm shocked, so shocked to hear that espionage is going on.
Okay. Well, I mean, my question then is, we don't know actually whether Russia was successful or not, so that is a big question mark. And also, what the more concrete response might be then in this kind of pas de deux or whatever you want to call it, whether there will be any sanctions on Russia.
Well, I think that's the right question, Caroline, on the concrete response. And you said we're stepping away from markets, but there is a clear read across from this kind of story to financial markets. And that's through the point you just mentioned, which is sanctions. And might this trigger additional Western sanctions against Russia? For example, the Russian local currency debt has not yet been sanctioned. An awful lot of other things in Russia have been. And that's a very popular instrument among international fixed income investors. It has good yield and a very stable and orthodox macro policy environment. So those are the types of risks. Well, the answer is it doesn't seem to be nefarious enough to justify such a bazooka. According to the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, the alleged Russian motive is to steal intellectual property. The Russians have already said, well, we've got our own vaccine candidates we're developing as well. Why do we want to steal that? So it seems to be typical kind of espionage type of typical to and fro stuff. Compare, for example, just 3 weeks ago, we had another allegation against Russian intelligence in the U.S., which was the Russian intelligence had paid the Taliban to kill U.S. troops. You might have thought that would be more inflammatory and cause sanctions. It hasn't yet. The thing is that sanctions just come on for no particular reason. It's a very difficult risk for investors to gauge.
Yes, indeed. It's difficult to read that. What do you make of the timing of this announcement by the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab here in the UK that there is this suspicion that Russia has been involved here in trying to hack for vaccine secrets, coming as it does just before we get, or we're expecting to get, the release of a much delayed report into the more broad involvement of Russia in British society?
Yes, well, I think a lot of weighty commentators in the media have pointed out that surprising coincidence, as it were, and who am I to say otherwise? It does seem a bit suspicious, doesn't it? Especially that other item you mentioned in your preamble. I think it was Anna. That is that as well as the allegation about Russian intelligence trying to hack the Oxford University vaccine project for COVID, there was also an allegation by the UK government yesterday that Russia had been involved in interfering in last December's general election here in the UK. Now, that election allegation, that's kind of been around for months. It sort of first was 3 months ago, and then it was suddenly reheated yesterday. Well, the timing coincidence to try to deflect from the government's political embarrassment potentially over the release of the House of Commons Intelligence Committee's report on Russian involvement in UK public life, one has to suspect that motive. After all, we are talking about espionage, aren't we?
Yeah, indeed. This is, of course, after Julian Grayling got the lead of the Parliament's powerful Intelligence and Security Committee, and he's the man that he was not Boris Johnson's favourite, and so he may be the one that will release that Russia report. Look, really fascinating, Christopher. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Christopher Granville, who is a former British diplomat himself in Moscow, but also now the managing director at TS Lombard. So interesting that he made that point, the read across into actually what espionage and spying means for the markets too.
Yeah, absolutely. Caroline mentioning there Julian Lewis, of course.
Yes,
in his fight with Chris Grayling. Easy to get merge these names together. Right, that's a look at what we are looking at on that particular espionage front. Let's get to world news with Roger Hearing.
Yeah, good morning, Anna. As the coronavirus continues to spread across the globe, the US and Asia are seeing new spikes and record numbers. Top US infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci says many states there reopened too quickly.
What I think we need to do, and my colleagues agree, is that we really got to almost regroup, call a timeout, not necessarily lock down again, but say we've got to do this in a more measured way.
In other news, the US Attorney General William Barr is accusing major American companies of becoming pawns of China. He says they're enabling Beijing to gain influence and wealth at the expense of Western democratic values.
If you are an American business leader, appeasing the PRC may bring short-term rewards, But in the end, the PRC's goal is to replace you. Corporations such as Google, Microsoft, Apple have shown themselves all too willing to collaborate with the CCP.
Back here in the UK, the government is going to appeal against a judgment from the appeal court that Shamima Begum, a woman who was stripped of her citizenship after she joined Islamic State, can return to the UK to fight her appeal. Bloomberg's Laura Joffre tells us more.
Shamima Begum was born in the UK. In 2015, she was still a teenager when she fled to Syria, where she married an Islamic State fighter. Last year, she was found by journalists in a Syrian camp. This is when Sajid Javid, then UK Home Secretary, decided to remove her British nationality. She appealed this decision, and on Thursday, judges in London ruled that she can't have a fair trial unless she returns to the UK. The British government said it is bitterly disappointed by the decision and will appeal. In Manchester, Laura Joffre, Bloomberg Day Break, Europe.
And Netflix shares plunged after it delivered a disappointing subscriber forecast. The world's largest paid streaming service expects to sign up just 2.5 million new users in the third quarter. That's less than half the number expected by Wall Street. Netflix also promoted a new co-CEO after promoting the chief content officer, Ted Sarandos, to work alongside the current CEO, Reed Hastings. Global news 24 hours a day on air on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Roger Hearing. This is Bloomberg. Anna.
Thanks very much, Roger. Now let's get the latest sports news. Here's George Alderman on an embarrassing gap in England's cricket squad.
England Director of Cricket Ashley Giles says Jofra Archer could have cost them tens of millions of pounds. The fast bowler's been left out of the second test with the West Indies for breaching strict coronavirus guidelines. He left the biosecure bubble to go home to Brighton in between matches. England resumed their first innings at Old Trafford on 207 for 3 this morning. The battle to finish in the top four of the Premier League looks like going down to the last game of the season. Manchester United remain fifth on goal difference following last night's 2-0 win over Crystal Palace. Leicester beat Sheffield United by the same score to hold on to their place in the Champions League spots. Aston Villa's 1-1 draw at Everton means they're 3 points from safety. Southampton against Brighton was also 1-1. There's a huge match this evening as West Ham take on Watford. Both sides are just a point clear of the relegation zone.
So that's the sports news for you. Now, joining us next is Tarek Jasarevich, who is the media spokesperson for the World Health Organization. So many questions to ask him, Anna, about the spread of the virus, vaccine nationalism, this desperation and spying accusation against Russia as, well, countries need a vaccine to save people, lives and their economies. This is Bloomberg.
The average time a resume spends on an HR manager's desk is 7 seconds, and most of them are tossed aside. Now imagine if one of those resumes belonged to Yasmin, who was
living in a shelter, juggling 3 jobs. I had to be resilient. That's something that you can't teach.
We rely so much on a resume, yet it could never tell the full story of someone who
had to be independent and take initiative. And that's how I handle every project I get.
Discover new ways to develop great talent at gradsoflife.org. Brought to you by Grads of Life and the Ad Council.
Take the Bond Challenge. Use the free Interactive Brokers Bond Search tool to search their deep availability of U.S. government securities, 34,000 global corporate bonds, and 850,000 municipals. IBKR passes through the highest of all bids and lowest of all offers received at the electronic venues it accesses. Interactive Brokers does not widen spreads, apply hidden fees, or markup quotes. How many basis points does your current broker keep? Find out at ibkr.com/bonds.
The following is a message from PGIM.
Welcome to Outsea in 60, Perspectives from PGIM Thought Leaders. Here's Mark Barabo, the head of Global Equity at Jennison Associates.
You're looking at bigger implications of technology playing a role in keeping us all connected, giving us access to information or goods very quickly. So we don't see any of those trends changing. In fact, they're likely to accelerate. There's some new things that have come along, though, that people might find useful, like telemedicine. There were skeptics about that, and I think the more people using it, especially the more doctors are using it today, the more they're liking it.
I have to remove the order to sell Japanese yen. It moved too far. Okay? So the order to sell Japanese yen removed.
Intended to be investment advice. and should not be used as the basis for any investment decision.
Millions of people in the UK struggle to put food on the table. Since 2018, Asda's donated £23 million to Fair Share and the Trussell Trust across the UK, which has helped more than 200,000 people. Please help us do more by donating to our Fight Hunger trolleys in store. Asda, we're all in this together. Fair Share and the Trussell Trust are registered charities. See asda.com/fight hunger.
How do we control coronavirus now? This is Scott. He's a nurse.
NHS Test and Trace helps stop the spread of the virus in our communities. If you've got symptoms, even mild ones, get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we can trace the people you've been in contact with and contain the virus. So get tested and protect each other.
To get a test, go to nhs.uk/coronavirus or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday morning by the scruff of the neck. Take this sunshine as an omen and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
And action.
I was offered one.
Cut. That's not on the script.
I was offered one. Get in.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was offered one.
Come, boy. I was offered one.
Don't take our word for it. 9 out of 10 people said they were offered a great value deal with O2. Get yours today, in-store, online, or by phone.
I was offered one too. O2 Retail Exit Survey 309 of 348 agreed with the statement. O2 offered me a great value deal. For full verification, see o2.co.uk/terms.
When you don't collect Nectar points while shopping for your picnic, it can feel like you're missing something. Like your picnic is missing the puh. It's like Icnic. And you're in the local Ark looking for the perfect spot to put your Icnic blanket and enjoying a glass of Prosecco while eating some margarita pizza. Make the most of your picnic. Don't miss out on a little extra with Nectar. Collect points on your shopping every day. Find our latest offers on the app.
At Vauxhall, we're feeling naughty. So this July, you'll get 0% interest and 0 to pay for 3 months on selected new Vauxhall cars and vans. Oh, and if you're a new customer, you'll also get a naughty £1,000 extra when you part exchange your old vehicle. Search Vauxhall event from the 10th to the 27th of July. Participating retailers, customer must part exchange non-Vauxhall that has been registered in their name for a minimum 90 days. T's and C's. First 3 monthly payments deferred. Personal contract purchase and conditional sale. Subject to status. 18 plus. Vauxhall Finance.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Times Radio, an exciting new national speech station, is here.
Featuring live news,
analysis, conversation,
and the unequivocal world-beating journalism of The Times.
Join Asma Mir and me, Stig Abel.
I'm John Pienaar. Join me on Times Radio.
Join me, Mariella Frostrup.
I'm Giles Corrin.
Hello, I'm Kathy Newman.
This is Michael Portillo.
Join me, Carol Walker.
I'm Hugo Rifkind.
Times Radio is here.
Search Times Radio on TuneIn to listen.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg QuickTake. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Anne-Marie Horder with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. European equities are fluctuating this morning, relatively flat across the FTSE 100. The Cacharon, a bit of softness, down 0.4%. The DAX, though, eking out a gain, and that could be because we had Daimler report better than expected results. And that's really the tug of war we're seeing across the Stock 600, which is trading flat. But auto parts, technology, those sectors are really in the green because of Ericsson and Daimler. But we do have banks, travel, leisure, dragging the index a little bit lower. lower. When it comes to U.S. equity futures, S&P 500 mini futures are up 0.2%. NASDAQ 100 mini futures clearly brushing off that late trading plunge in Netflix. They are up 0.9% this morning. Across currencies this morning, we do have a weaker dollar. On cable, it's 1 spot 25, dollar yen 107.13, euro 1 spot 14. So gaining a little bit as we head into the weekend as leaders meet. Traders are going to be seeing whether or not they can wrap up a stimulus fund over the weekend. Kit Jukes just out in the last 15 minutes saying the council likely to kick the can a few weeks down the path. When it comes to the bond market, bit of a mixed picture, although we are seeing yields basically rise across the continent, eking out some gains there on the yields, but the 10-year yield down 1 basis point, 0.6%. That's a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now here's Roger Herring with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Roger.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. The UK's warned that Russia is seeking to steal the virus vaccine research. Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre says facilities in multiple countries have been targeted by a group which is almost certainly part of Russian intelligence. Security agencies in the US and Canada later backed up those findings. Meanwhile, the British Health Secretary has announced some of the local lockdown restrictions in Leicester being eased after a drop in virus infection rate there. Matt Hancock says schools there will be allowed to resume from Friday of next week with a decision on reopening non-essential shops handed to local politicians. Hancock also told MPs the area covered by the rules is being changed. And a British-built satellite has taken the closest images ever of the sun. They reveal a surface dotted with thousands of tiny solar flares, which are being described as campfires by scientists. The photos were taken 48 million miles away, roughly halfway between the sun and the Earth. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Roger Herring. This is Bloomberg. Anna.
Thanks very much, Roger. Now, coming up next, our colleagues in the US are getting ready for Bloomberg Day Break. Let's check in with Nathan Hager, who can tell us what lies ahead. Here in Europe, we're really focused on this European Leaders Summit that's taking place in Brussels, Nathan. Is that cutting through, do you think, for US investors? What's ahead for you?
Well, we're starting off this morning, Anna, with the very latest on the coronavirus. I mean, that continues to be the focal point for investors in this country, although we're seeing markets on this Friday morning pointing to some slight gains. We're also seeing conditions in states like Texas and Florida start to deteriorate to the kind of level that we saw in New York just a few months ago, and that is definitely a worrying sign, so much so that Dr. Anthony Fauci is putting out the warning that a lot more states might want to think about reimposing restrictions. So we're going to have a lot more on what that means for the recovery going forward, as well as the pressure on Congress to act on another round of relief. We're going to have more from our one-on-one conversation with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi when it comes to where lawmakers are on the issue of fiscal support. We'll also speak with Brown University Political Science Chair Wendy Schiller about the growing rift we're seeing between scientists and the White House as this pandemic continues in this country. We also have an eye on Netflix. The stock is continuing to get hammered in the pre-market on its disappointing third quarter outlook. We'll ask Dan Ives of Wedbush Securities about his outlook for streaming services and the tech sector more broadly as Karen Moscow and I get you set for Friday here on Bloomberg Day Break. Hope you'll join us for it. Anna.
Yeah, really interesting, Nathan, that outperformance of the NASDAQ futures, despite the fact we see that share price of Netflix coming under such pressure. No doubt you will have guests who can explain. Nathan, thanks very much. Bloomberg Day Break is up next. Or if you're listening on London DAB Digital Radio, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance.
Well, on to another conversation about the pandemic, because we're 6 months into the worst global pandemic in 100 years or so. The desperation of countries to save lives and their economies is clear after the UK, US and Canada say that Russian intelligence has been hacking research centres that are racing to develop a COVID-19 vaccine, something the Kremlin has denied. But joining us this morning to discuss this and much more is Tarek Jasarevich, who is the media spokesperson for the World Health Organization. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. Look, this vaccine nationalism is a huge concern. Surely it's inevitable, though, that the US, the UK, China, or whichever country develops the vaccine first will see their populations shielded first, and some would say rightly so.
As you say, it's very important that we get as soon as possible to efficient and safe vaccine. Right now,
there is the 21 candidate vaccines that are already in a human trials, and there is in total 160 candidate vaccines that have been registered with WHO. We hope, if everything goes well with these trials, that we may have out of those 21 at least couple that are considered safe and efficient by beginning of next year. And then obviously we will have to look into the production and distribution, and what's very important for us, equal access to not only vaccines but also diagnostics and therapeutics. WHO has put in place a coalition and mechanism that we call COVID-19 Tool Accelerator that is looking with member states but with other partners as well how we can ensure that this vaccine, once we have it, once it's produced, is being really given in a way that the most vulnerable people get it first.
What does equal access mean then, Tarek, when it comes to the distribution of this vaccine? I know Gavi is working on this as well, an alliance on vaccines. What will it mean, equal access?
What will mean really is that if everything goes well and we get some 2 billion doses by late 2021, is to have all member states agree on how this distribution will be done. We will be definitely looking is who are the people who should get the vaccine first. Are we looking into healthcare workers, response people, essential workers, vulnerable population in vulnerable settings? So this is something that discussion has already started on, and we hope that member states will understand that vaccine, like any other tool that we will try to come up with, should be a public good.
Are you not concerned, though, about the waning power, the waning the weight that the World Health Organization will actually have? I mean, for example, Berlin wants the World Health Organization to speed up a review of how you've handled the pandemic. The United States is in the process of withdrawing from the organization. The concern is that you don't have the influence right now.
Well, ultimately, the mandate of WHO is defined by member states themselves. So countries decide what will be the role and how WHO will function. Currently, we do function under international health regulations. And our role is really to coordinate the response, to try to come up with the best mechanism to work with the scientific world, to try to get to solution, and at the same time to provide the accurate information, pandemic, as well as best recommendations to countries on how to deal with it.
Do you fear, though, Tarek, that with the US withdrawal, if it goes ahead in 11 months' time, that this could be the end of the WHO?
Well, I think there will be always a need for international coordination in the public health, and it's very difficult to speculate what member states will decide in the future when it comes to global public health. But what we have seen is that at our last World Health Assembly late May, member states have adopted by consensus a resolution that calls for more of international cooperation, and part of it is exactly the review that is being now the work will be starting as we have appointed co-chairs of this independent panel of review, but not only of WHO. The review that is being called on by all countries, it's an international response. So this review is not only looking at WHO, but also what government has done and how they reacted.
Well, speaking of which, the UK putting aside £3 billion for the winter pandemic and preparation. Testing has been sparse, contact tracing non-existent, the UK's mortality rate incredibly high. Why have we performed so badly in Britain?
Well, let's be honest. This virus was of such a force and of such a surprise as well that many countries around the world have found themselves not adequately prepared. So we understand that many health systems have been overwhelmed, that not all the measures that normally should be put in place to contain the spread of the virus could have been put in place in all places. And that's not really a feature of one country, but many countries in the world. What we are saying at WHO is that we really need to invest in a public health systems that are ready and try as much as it's possible to reduce mortality and morbidity from COVID-19 while at the same time engaging communities. And what's really important is the leadership. This has to be all of the governments approach. So what is needed really right now, as we are entering in a really difficult and dangerous phase of this pandemic, is really to work all together through international solidarity to find a solution while at the same time try to go on with our lives.
Yeah, I wonder whether that will be enough of an answer for people here in the UK as kind of fear of the virus turns to some anger about how the UK has handled it. But I really appreciate your time. Tarek Jasarevic, who is the media spokesperson for the World Health Organization as the global pandemic continues. Next up, you can listen to Daybreak Europe out of the United States or to Bloomberg Surveillance on DAB.
The market is
When your tenants have an overflowing block sink and you've got a busy day ahead, superheroes crashing through the wall isn't going to help anyone. With Direct Line Landlord Emergency added to your policy, we're on it to send a rather super drainage engineer in 4 hours before you've tucked into your lunch. We can also assemble plumbers, locksmiths, glaziers and electricians. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line. Residential properties. Optional add-on up to 1,500 per caller. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel, Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
Capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, this is Bloomberg Day Break for Friday, July 17th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
The U.S. shatters its single-day record for coronavirus infections with more than 70,000 cases.
Dr. Anthony Fauci warns states it's time to roll back reopening measures.
A new stimulus plan could be just weeks away. We speak with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
And shares of Netflix slide as subscriber growth stalls.
Governor Cuomo decides today whether New York City enters a Phase 4 reopening, plus Georgia's governor sues the mayor of Atlanta over a face mask mandate. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. Tiger Woods made his return to the PGA Tour, and Mets ace Jacob deGrom says he'll be ready to pitch opening day.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by SEI. Today's competitive marketplace requires asset managers to become more operationally adept. See how you can transform your business with SEI's global platform at SEIC.com/IMS.
U.S. futures are higher this morning, 5:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures up 6 points, Dow futures up 15, NASDAQ futures up 96. The DAX in Germany is up 0.2%, while the FTSE 100 is down 0.2%, and the CAC in Paris is down 0.5%. 10-year Treasury up 2/30 seconds, yield 0.60%, and the yield on the 2-year 0.14%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.8% or 34 cents at $40.41 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.1%, up $1.70 at $18.02 an ounce. Nathan.
Karen, the U.S. has shattered its single-day record for coronavirus infections, registering more than 70,000 cases. More states are rolling back reopening measures. Washington State is pushing pause on its plans. Pennsylvania is imposing fresh restrictions. And Dr. Anthony Fauci says it's time for other states to follow suit.
We really got to almost regroup, call a timeout, not necessarily lock down again, but say we've got to do this in a more measured way. We've got to get our arms around this, and we've got to get this controlled.
Fauci spoke on Facebook Live with CEO Mark Zuckerberg. He says too many states reopened too soon.
Florida reopened May 4th. Now it's reporting another day of record fatalities, and Miami Mayor Francis Suarez expects the death rate will continue to rise.
We're at double the number of COVID patients that we were in March, April. We're at the highest level of hospitalization that we've seen throughout this pandemic.
Florida's already rolled back some reopening measures, and in Miami, Suarez says more restrictions could be on the way.
Texas is also reporting its worst day for deaths since the start of the pandemic. For the third straight day, new cases in the state topped 10,000. Governor Greg Abbott tells KPRC TV the outbreak leaves him few options.
What I want to do is to make sure that everyone begins to wear a mask so that we will be able to get COVID-19 under control, so that we will not have to shut Texas back down.
Texas is mobilizing overflow space to store bodies as communities anticipate a surge in fatalities. Hospitals and local officials have requested refrigerated trucks and trailers for storing the dead.
Dr. Fauci says he is optimistic a coronavirus treatment will be ready by fall. But when it comes to hopes for a vaccine, a new poll paints a bleak picture. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has that story.
Nearly two-thirds of healthcare industry leaders anticipate the coronavirus pandemic will continue into the second half of 2021 or longer, as hopes for a vaccine this year dwindle. According to a Lazard survey of 221 executives and investors across the healthcare industry, the availability of an effective vaccine is the top concern for 71% of the respondents. Almost three-quarters say a vaccine will not be widely available before the second half of 2021. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Day Break.
All right, Charlie, thank you. On Capitol Hill, the push for another coronavirus relief bill is picking up steam. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tells us she's confident a new measure can pass Congress in the coming weeks.
We can't go home without it. And so because of the unemployment insurance expiring and the rest of that, we have to have the legislation. It's been 2 months.
Pelosi says she has no doubt Republicans will come around to the idea of another stimulus package. In the past few weeks, GOP leadership has moved from questioning the need to working toward another $1 trillion in relief. Now we're learning President Trump wants a payroll tax cut in the package. The White House is signaling he may reject any bill that doesn't include such a measure.
And we'll have more from that interview with Speaker Pelosi coming up 10 minutes from now. But first, Attorney General William Barr is taking aim at the country's biggest tech companies and their relationship with China.
Corporations such as Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Apple have shown themselves all too willing to collaborate with the CCP.
Barr says the companies have become pawns of the Chinese Communist Party, enabling the government to amass influence and wealth at the expense of democratic values.
For example, Apple recently removed the news app Quartz from its app store in China after the Chinese government complained about the coverage of Hong Kong democracy protests. Apple also removed the apps for virtual private networks, which had allowed users to circumvent the Great Firewall, and eliminated pro-democracy songs from the Chinese music store.
Attorney General Barr went on to give examples of Disney and others giving in to demands from the Chinese government. He's the latest of several White House officials to ramp up attacks on Beijing.
Now, Netflix was not on the receiving end of that criticism, but its shares are still under heavy fire. The stock is down 8% in early trading after a disappointing subscriber forecast. Netflix expects to sign up 2.5 million new customers in the third quarter. Wall Street expected twice that. Dan Morgan covers the company for Cinevis Trust.
Maybe they're just trying to lower the expectations on the street. We know that Netflix stock has made a huge run, trading at 80 times fiscal year 2020 estimates. It was priced to perfection, right? There was just no room here. So I'm wondering if management is just being cautious, like they were saying earlier, about the consumer is eventually maybe going to pull back a little bit.
In April, Netflix warned growth would slow, but investors were hoping they'd be pleasantly surprised. Shares have been bid to record highs, pushing the market value of Netflix past the likes of Walt Disney.
And again, futures are higher. S&P futures up 5.5 points. Dow futures up 9. NASDAQ futures up 93. The euro this morning, 1.1417 against the dollar. The British pound at 1.2562. And the yen is at 107.17. And straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
Okay, thank you, Karen. It's 5:07 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr is here with more on what's going on around the world. Happy Friday, Michael.
Happy Friday to you, Nathan. New York City is on track for a Phase 4 opening by Monday. Good Governor Andrew Cuomo says he will make a decision whether it will happen by 4 p.m. today. Cuomo remains fearful of what the pandemic is doing to America as hospital ICU beds in numerous states hit max capacity with patients suffering from COVID-19.
We're trying to impose a quarantine, but I'm very afraid of an increase in the infection rate because of what's happening in the other states, and that's why I want the federal government to wake up and do their job.
Cuomo also says New York City bars and restaurants will be subject to tougher penalties for violations because of a lack of compliance. State officials say New Yorkers thinking of getting a coronavirus test should check that their sample will be processed by a local lab. Governor Cuomo said surging demand for diagnostic tests across the country is making it harder for people to get timely results. He says in New York, close to 70% of COVID-19 tests are being processed by a network of more than 200 local labs that don't take as long. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy reminded everyone to self-quarantine for 14 days and get tested if they visited coronavirus hotspots as the number of cases in his state begins to slowly creep back up. Murphy also says school districts in New Jersey are still finalizing their plans for the next school year.
While districts across the state are working hard to ensure a safe, underline safe, return for their students this fall, we are also aware that for some students, remote learning will remain a part of their experience.
Another 32 people died in New Jersey, with the death toll at almost 13,700. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp sued the mayor of Atlanta to stop her from enforcing a city mandate that people wear masks in public given a spike in coronavirus infections. Kemp, a Republican, said in a statement that he filed the lawsuit to force Democratic Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms to comply with his executive order blocking Atlanta and at least 14 other local governments across the state from requiring residents to wear face coverings. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thanks. It's 5:09 on Wall Street. Time for the Pertinent Accountants and Advisors Sports Report. Good morning, John Stachar.
All right, good morning, Nathan. We are just 6 days away from the Yankees season opener against the Nationals, and yet it is not known where the game will be played. It's supposed to be in D.C., but the city may enforce quarantine regulations for anyone who may have been exposed to the virus, and the game could be moved to Fredericksburg, Virginia, where the Nats have a minor league team, or even to their spring training facility in West Palm Beach, Florida. The Mets open up a week from tonight at Citi Field, and Jacob deGrom is confident he'll pitch. The Mets ace experienced tightness in his back on Wednesday.
What was weird is it was just out of the blue, so I think I must have slept wrong, or, because like I said, when I threw Sunday, I felt like I could have pitched. The day I threw my bullpen, I felt like I could have pitched and felt completely fine. So this was nothing like one pitch. It just was something that didn't loosen up.
If deGrom can't go in the opener, the Mets would use Marcus Stroman. There'll be some noise at these games that won't have fans. Fake crowd noise will be piped in from an MLB video game. There'll be a public address announcer and the usual walk-up music before every at-bat. The NBA may do the same kinds of things. Eric Bledsoe, starting guard for the league-leading Milwaukee Bucks, tested positive for COVID, so he's not with the team in Orlando. And New Orleans rookie sensation Zion Williamson left Orlando due to a family medical emergency, so he'll have to quarantine upon his return. It was one thing to have the PGA Tour make its return. Yesterday, maybe a bigger deal, the return of Tiger Woods at the Memorial in Ohio, his first round since February, a 1 under par 71. Tiger trails Tony Finau by 5 shots. Second round today. Woods tees off at 8:17 this morning. John Stachauer, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
All right, John, thanks. Now, how do you put together a big sports tournament in the middle of a pandemic? We'll ask the co-founder of the premier lacrosse league. Tune in for a conversation with Paul Rabel on the Bloomberg Business of Sports show tonight at 7 and tomorrow at 11 a.m. on Bloomberg Radio, or subscribe to the Bloomberg Business of Sports podcast. NASDAQ futures surging this morning, up 95 points right now. S&P futures up 5. Dow futures up 9 points. This is Bloomberg.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, makes innovation happen. NJIT faculty mentored Christoph Camacho when he was a student, helping him co-found a startup and patent a device that uses drone technology for reforestation and to collect valuable data for land management.
I founded Paratrees back in 2016, taking what I learned from my research at NJIT and migrating it to a startup. Our technology is to really enhance land management operations. So we work very closely with land management companies. So we have a drone that performs precision reforestation, and we do storm damage assessment, having access to drones that can collect data so it's much faster. And what is more important, we help them drive management decisions. NJIT has been there every step of the way, going full force with my company.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at seic.com/seize change.
The following is a...
Millions of people in the UK struggle to put food on the table. Since 2018, Asda's donated £23 million to Fair Share and the Trussell Trust across the UK, which has helped more than 200,000 people. Please help us do more by donating to our Fight Hunger trolleys in store. Asda, we're all in this together. Fair Share and the Trussell Trust are registered charities. See asda.com/fight hunger.
How do we control coronavirus now? This is Scott. He's a nurse.
NHS Test and Trace helps stop the spread of the virus in our communities. If you've got symptoms, even mild ones, get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we can trace the people you've been in contact with and contain the virus. So get tested and protect each other.
To get a test, go to nhs.uk/coronavirus or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday morning by the scruff of the neck. Take this sunshine as an omen and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Ever wondered how people's postcode lottery works? Easy. Your postcode is your ticket. And every weekday it gives you the chance to win £1,000 or £30,000 every weekend. And every month players in your postcode could win a share of £3 million. Join in at postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 23rd of July to play in the August draws. PPL manage lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus. Conditions apply. Play responsibly.
Television. Here's Emily Chang.
The U.S., the U.K., and Canada are accusing Russian intelligence of trying to steal coronavirus vaccine research. This, according to the British National Cybersecurity Centre. Vaccine and therapeutic sectors in multiple countries have been targeted. British authorities saying the group responsible for the hack is known as Cozy Bear and is almost certainly part of Russian state intelligence. To discuss, we are joined by Nicole Egan of Darktrace, the co-founder and chief strategy officer there. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. So what is your analysis of what exactly happened here?
As you stated, the intelligence communities have gotten together. They issued warnings originally in May that they saw early signs of this type of activity, and now they've confirmed it, and they have made attribution. As you said, they're known as Cozy Bear. They're known in cyber circles as APT-29 as well. We've seen this group before, so this isn't the first time. We actually saw them. This is the same group with the DNC, with the Pentagon. And I think what's really interesting is trying to get at the heart of, what are they after? Clearly, the U.S. and our allies have spent in the billions of dollars already towards vaccine research. So there's clearly a lot at stake financially, economically, and of course, about saving lives.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Futures on the rise. S&P futures up 8.5 points. Dow futures up 35. NASDAQ futures up 104. The 10-year Treasury up 2/32, yield 0.61%. And NYMEX crude oil is down 0.6% or 26 cents at $40.49 a barrel. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, the U.S. has shattered its single-day record for coronavirus infections, registering more than 70,000 cases. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp sued the mayor of Atlanta to stop her from enforcing a city mandate that people wear masks in public, given a spike in coronavirus infections. Big donors from Hollywood and the technology sector poured money into Joe Biden's coffers in the second quarter, while President Trump saw a major drop in support from people writing big checks, according to new financial filings. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thanks. It's 5:18 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. This is Bloomberg Day Break. Now let's bring you more from our conversation with Nancy Pelosi. The House Speaker joined Bloomberg's David Weston to discuss the government's response to COVID-19, the push to restart in-person classes this fall, and the prospects for another coronavirus stimulus package. Here's more of David's exclusive interview with House Speaker Pelosi.
How can we restart the economy and be safe at the same time? As we see the uptick in coronavirus cases in Florida and Arizona and Texas, can we do both?
Yes, we have to. You can't do one without the other, though. You have to address the coronavirus issue, as we have been saying all along. Open our economy. Do so by testing. If you test and you trace and you treat and you isolate, you can contain the virus, you can open the economy. The same holds true for our children going to school. They want to go to school, we want them to go to school, their parents do, teachers want to teach, but you can't risk their health in doing so. And in order to open the schools and the economy, there's a simple solution: testing. And it's worked in other countries. Until, God willing, we have a vaccine or a cure, testing. Now, what I'm calling upon the president to do is to use his authority to execute the Defense Production Act. People are not getting tested enough because there isn't enough equipment. Those tests are not analyzed to find out if you're positive or negative because there isn't enough equipment. The schools are not prepared to open up, and hospitals caring for people because they don't have enough personal protective equipment. And so we're saying just face the fact.
Madam Speaker, you raised the question of the schools, which I think is on so many Americans' minds across the country right now as we approach September once again, how we can get our kids back to school in some form, maybe a hybrid form, safely. At the same time, that's going to take a lot of money as a practical matter.
That is.
We're going to have to reconfigure a lot of schools. Where is that money going to come from? Mitch McConnell says he actually might be willing to put up some money for that. Can you come to terms on that at least?
Well, in the HEROES Act, we have $100 billion education stabilization fund specifically for the coronavirus. Much of it for elementary, for K through 12, and then some of it for higher education. Because if you're going to go to school, and again, we want people, all the testing, tracing, etc., but you have to have the distancing. And if you're going to be distant 6 feet apart, which you must, then you need more you need more space, you need more teachers, and you need attention to the ventilation system in the schools, as well as testing for not only teachers but custodians and others. And so instead of the president threatening to withhold money from schools that don't open, he should be granting money to schools so that they can open.
It's been 2 months now since the House passed the HEROES Act bill, and that is sort of the fourth wave of the stimulus. We haven't had any response out of the Senate really effectively. We hear Mitch McConnell say he's going to come forward with something next week. What is it going to take to get the two sides together to get something done? Because you have the school situation coming up soon. You also have unemployment insurance, which we're really coming up with in another couple of weeks.
Another couple of weeks that will expire. I have no doubt that they will come around. At the beginning, he said, no, we spent enough money. Now they're at $1.3 trillion. That's not enough. We have $3.4 trillion. As you know, the Fed has spent a good deal of money making sure the stock market is okay, one way or another. Trillions of dollars, actually. And we think if we can bolster the stock market that way, we can, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing that we should be able to bolster the middle class, our working families.
Madam Speaker, you said the Republicans will come around, Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership on the Senate side. Will they do it in time to get this done within the next 2 weeks? What's your level of confidence we will have legislation out within the next 2 weeks?
Well, we're not, let me just say this. We can't go home without it. And so because of the unemployment insurance expiring and the rest of that, we have to have the legislation. It's been 2 months. It's been 2 months. More people have died, more people have gone unemployed, and more people have been infected. What's the value of their waiting? I mean, I know that there's some people who say it's too much money, but as I've said to you before, what we're doing for state and local government is 1/2 of what the Republicans added to the national debt in order to pass their tax scam, which gave 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. We're not a caste system. We have to make sure that we have, as we recognize, a consumer economy, the confidence that people have in order to have money, to spend it, to inject demand into the economy, create jobs. That's what we have to thrive on, and not just depend on some possible trickle down. If it happens, good. If not, so be it.
And that's House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in conversation with David Weston on Bloomberg Balance of Power. You can catch the show weekdays at noon Eastern on both Bloomberg Radio and Television, and listen to more of that interview online at Bloomberg.com. Now let's get a check of how the markets are faring on this Friday morning. S&P futures are higher now by 9.5 points. Dow futures up 43. NASDAQ futures leading the gains in the futures markets. They're up 107 points. That's higher by 1%. DAX in Germany's up 0.25%. CAC in Paris lower by 0.4%. 10 years up 3/32, yield 0.60%. 2-year yield 0.14%. NYMEX crude oil down 0.5%, down 20 cents, $40.55 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.1%, up $2.90, 1803.20 an ounce. The euro is at 1.1416 against the dollar. The yen at 107.18. And you're listening to Bloomberg Day Break.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Tech stocks pushed the U.S. market lower yesterday for the first time in 3. The NASDAQ lost about 0.75%. The Dow fell 0.5%. The S&P 500 wasn't too far behind with its decline. A fledgling recovery in U.S. air travel is losing steam as the nation's coronavirus pandemic worsens, while passenger counts ahead of the July 4th holiday rose to their highest level since March 18th. TSA numbers show growth has been falling off, and that echoes warnings from Delta, United, and American Airlines, who've talked about a stalled rebound ahead. State officials say that New Yorkers thinking of getting a coronavirus test should check that their sample will be processed by a local lab instead of companies like LabCorp of America and Quest Diagnostics, because a national testing logjam leads to extended wait times for results. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong.
Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Why do hedge funds and other... How do we control coronavirus now? This is Scott. He's a nurse.
NHS Test and Trace helps stop the spread of the virus in our communities. If you've got symptoms, even mild ones, get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we can trace the people you've been in contact with and contain the virus. So get tested and protect each other.
To get a test, go to nhs.uk/coronavirus or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday morning by the scruff of the neck. Take this sunshine as an omen and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
When you don't collect nectar points while shopping for your picnic, it can feel like you're missing something. Like your picnic is missing the P. It's like Icnic, and you're in the local Ark looking for the perfect spot to put your Icnic blanket and enjoying a glass of Prosecco while eating some margarita pizza. Make the most of your picnic. Don't miss out on a little extra with Nectar. Collect points on your shopping every day. Find our latest offers on the app.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with Moonpig.com. Download the app now.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Day Break.
It's 5:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. We are just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures are higher this morning as we head into the final trading day of the week. And as the U.S. shatters its single-day record for coronavirus infections, the country registered more than 70,000 cases, and that has states like Washington and Pennsylvania rolling back reopening measures. Dr. Anthony Fauci says it's time for other states to follow suit.
We really got to almost regroup, call a timeout, not necessarily lock down again, but say we've got to do this in a more measured way. We've got to get our arms around this, and we've got to get this controlled.
Florida is reporting another day of record fatalities. That has Miami Mayor Francis Suarez considering another lockdown.
There is no federal safety net like there was, and there's very little, if any, of federal and state guidance on how and what metric we need to use to close. So we're developing that all on our own, and we're faced with making these tough decisions in the next few days if things don't improve radically.
Texas finds itself in a similar situation, reporting its worst day for deaths and the third straight day with infections topping 10,000. Officials expect the surge in fatalities to grow. They're requesting refrigerated trucks and trailers to store bodies.
Turning away from the virus now, the Trump administration is starting a new line of attack on China. Attorney General William Barr is taking aim at the country's relationship with big tech.
Corporations such as Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Apple
have shown themselves all too willing to collaborate with the CCP.
Attorney General Barr says those companies and Disney have become pawns of the Chinese Communist Party. He's the latest of several White House officials to ramp up attacks on Beijing.
Now, Netflix was not on the receiving end of that criticism, but its shares are still under heavy fire. The stock is down 7% in early trading after a disappointing subscriber forecast. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has more.
The world's largest paid streaming service says it expects to sign up 2.5 million new subscribers this period, compared with the more than 5 million expected on Wall Street after 2 quarters of torrid pandemic-fueled customer growth. Netflix signed up 10.1 million new paid customers in the second period, beating Wall Street's average estimate of 8.27 million. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Day Break.
All right, Charlie, thank you. S&P futures are up about 11 points. Dow futures up 54. NASDAQ futures up 107. 10-year Treasury up 2/32, yield 0.60%. Yield on the 2-year 0.14%. And NYMEX crude oil is down 0.5%. And straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. And this is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thank you. It's 5:33 on Wall Street. Now let's get more on what's going on around the world from Bloomberg's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Nathan. New York City is on track for a Phase 4 opening by Monday. Governor Andrew Cuomo says he will make a decision whether it will happen by 4 p.m. today. Indoor activities will still not be allowed if approved. Cuomo targeted the Trump administration for its handling of the pandemic, saying that the federal response has largely ignored scientific data.
They have been in denial from day one. They thought they were going to handle this virus politically. You can't. A virus does not respond to politics. A virus responds to science and medicine. And let them learn the lesson, because they're still doing it. Thousands of Americans are dying who don't need to die.
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy reminded everyone to self-quarantine for 14 days and get tested if they visited coronavirus hotspots, as the number of cases in his state begins to slowly creep back up.
We didn't anticipate Florida, Arizona, Texas, California, North Carolina, South Carolina, etc., all exploding, and some additional amount of rate of transmission has crept into New Jersey. We're doing everything we can to keep a wall up, if you will.
Murphy also says school districts in New Jersey are still finalizing their plans for the next school year. In Georgia, where hospitalizations are hitting record levels, Republican Governor Brian Kemp is now suing Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and 14 other cities to stop them from requiring masks. Kemp said local elected officials are trying to shutter businesses and undermine economic growth. Bottoms, a Democrat, said in a Twitter post that the virus has already infected 106,000 people, including her and her family. President Trump has long blamed the economic challenges the country had faced on strict federal regulations. Outside the White House yesterday, the president drew applause when he praised his administration for deregulation actions he says will stimulate the economy, health care, and job growth.
These oppressive, burdensome mandates were a stealth tax on our people, slashing take-home pay, suppressing innovation, surging the cost of goods, and shipping millions of American jobs overseas. Millions and millions and millions. It never ended.
The president's comments come as 2 national polls show him trailing presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden by double digits. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thank you, Michael. It is coming up to 5:36 on Wall Street. It's time for the Burden Accountants and Advisors Sports Report. Here's John Stashower.
Well, Nathan, no one ever said starting the baseball season in the midst of a pandemic would be smooth sailing. First game of the season is to be next Thursday, Yankees and Nationals in D.C., except that city officials there may enforce quarantine regulations that could force the game to be moved. Maybe Fredericksburg, Virginia, or even West Palm Beach, Florida. Mets says Jacob deGrom just had an MRI on his back. It came back clean.
Tuesday when I went to throw, just, was pretty tight, so decided to say something out of an abundance of caution to stay healthy, wasn't really planning on getting an image of it, but just said, hey, let's go ahead and make sure everything's fine. So checked all the boxes, and the plan is to be able to pitch opening day.
Which is 1 week from tonight at Citi Field. Giants kicker Aldrich Rosas, formerly charged with 3 misdemeanors stemming from a high-speed hit-and-run incident in California last month. Rosas had a DUI a few years ago. On the week that the Washington NFL team announced it will no longer be called the Redskins, a damaging Washington Post report about sexual misconduct by several team employees over a 14-year period. 15 women who used to work for the team made the allegation against several men in the inner circle of team owner Dan Snyder, but not Snyder himself. Pro Personnel Director Alex Santos was recently fired. The team's play-by-play announcer Larry Michael just resigned. They'll play the second round of the Memorial Golf today in Muirfield, Ohio. Tony Finau yesterday, 7 birdies in his last 10 holes. Shot 6 under, leads Ryan Palmer by 1 shot. A 1 under 71 for Tiger Woods in his first round since February. He admitted to being a bit rusty. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
Thank you, John. It's 5:37 on Wall Street and time for the Tri-State Business Report. Here's Bloomberg's Ed Corey.
Performing arts institutions in New York City are reducing staff as pandemic-related closures stretch into 2021. The cuts come as millions in federal aid is running out. Carnegie Hall this week furloughed 51 full-time workers, or 19% of its active staff, and implemented pay cuts for the remaining employees. Hotels are getting creative in efforts to get business going during the travel standstill. The Hoxton Hotel in Brooklyn's Williamsburg neighborhood plans to rent entire floors for $2,020 a night when it reopens Monday. They also have a few honesty rooms, which allow guests to pay what they can afford. Princeton University endowment chief Andy Golden received $6.3 million in compensation in 2018. That made him the school's highest paid official. Golden got a base salary of about $955,000, bonus and incentive pay of $2.8 million, and $2.4 million of retirement and other deferred compensation. That's your Bloomberg Tri-State Business Report. I'm Ed Corey.
Thanks, Ed. It's 5:38 on Wall Street. Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm Jeff Bellinger, and on WIOD in Miami, I'm reporting Florida's film festival will include virtual screenings because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and for WCCO in Minneapolis, I'm reporting that Target joins the growing list of retailers to require masks inside stores.
I'm Caroline Hepk on Bloomberg DAB Digital Radio in London. We're reporting on claims that Russia has been trying to steal UK vaccine research.
I'm Steve Podeskin on KNX in Los Angeles. We're talking about how after a strong lockdown quarter, Netflix is downplaying future subscriber growth.
I'm Ed Corey on WWJ in Detroit. I'm reporting the government is giving a $139 million grant to fund electric car battery projects.
Those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. Now, some other stories we're watching. BlackRock reports earnings this morning on the heels of results from the biggest U.S. banks. Let's get a preview now from Bloomberg's Larry Kofsky.
Higher asset prices may benefit the company, the largest global manager and the first pure play to report. But Bloomberg Intelligence says lower prices entering the quarter will still weigh on profit. Analysts surveyed by Bloomberg are forecasting an 8% increase in earnings per share from a year ago to about $6.96. Revenue is seen rising less than 1% to about $3.5 billion. Investors will be paying close attention to CEO Larry Fink's comments on market conditions and global economic risks. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Day Break.
All right, Larry, thanks. And Tesla set a record in China last month. Almost 15,000 of the electric car maker's vehicles were registered there in June. That's a 32% increase from May and the highest ever. The competition's picking up. BMW and Mercedes are set to roll out new electric models. Futures moving higher. This is Bloomberg.
Debbie Hart is president of BioNJ, which represents the interests of more than 400 New Jersey-based biotech companies. She's also a strong voice in the biotech sector, supporting research universities like New Jersey Institute of Technology. She sees NJIT as a valuable partner in attracting venture capital and biotech startups to the Garden State.
So the number one reason the companies come here to New Jersey for the biotech industry is for our talent.
We estimate that there were about 30 biotech companies in the early 90s in New Jersey, about 80 in 1998. Today, there are more than 400. And that growth continues, and it's come from every possible angle. Other countries, other states, they've spun out of our academic institutions as well as our biotech and our pharma companies, and we expect that growth to continue long into the future. And NJIT is a pipeline for talent, for companies, for entrepreneurs to do that important work.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
President of the Jewish Communal Fund, Zoya Raines, and her husband, Robert Friedman, Jewish activists and philanthropists, talk about why they chose the Jewish Communal Fund for their charitable giving.
As very busy working parents, we wanted to focus more on the charity part of it and wanted to focus more on our children and less on the administration.
The Jewish Communal Fund is one of the oldest and largest donor-advised funds, but at the same time, they're totally up to date and have state-of-the-art systems for us to access and manage our contributions online. The assets in our fund at the JCF grow tax-free, so we can generate more charitable dollars to support the charities that we care about most.
Let JCF minimize your taxes and maximize your charitable giving.
We're incredibly passionate about our charity, and the JCF allows us to focus more on the charity and less on the administration and the headaches.
For more information about Jewish Communal Fund, visit our website at jcfny.org and request a new fund kit.
This is your Bloomberg.
So you're out for your usual run, and the best part, you're at the end of it. Especially as you knock 7 seconds off your PB. Woohoo! How did that happen? Who cares? Now that feels like winning. So roll with it and turn today into Wednesday with a scratch card. Make today a Wednesday with a scratch card from the National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen. Search Dream Big, Play Small. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
When you don't collect nectar points while shopping for your picnic, it can feel like you're missing something. Like your picnic is missing the P. It's like Icnic. And you're in the local Ark looking for the perfect spot to put your Icnic blanket and enjoying a glass of Prosecco while eating some margarita pizza. Make the most of your picnic. Don't miss out on a little extra with Nectar. Collect points on your shopping every day. Find our latest offers on the app.
When you're facing a problem, like how to make an electric car more efficient, you could sit down and talk it through. But at Honda, we decided to listen to the wind tunnel. With wing mirrors? Or without?
Yes.
With?
No.
Without?
Yes.
With?
No.
Without?
Yes.
Or with cameras instead of wing mirrors?
Sweet.
The new Honda E with wing cameras, not mirrors, because we listen to the wind. Honda, the power of dreams.
Sneaking flies out the bag is back.
Oi, I saw that. Get your own.
Drive-through, McDelivery and takeaway now available. Served after 11 a.m. McDelivery at participating restaurants only. See website for details.
News 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
The number of new coronavirus cases across the U.S. continues to rise. Johns Hopkins University reported Thursday there were more than 70,000 new cases in one day. Infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci says Europe has done a better job containing the virus.
When you looked at what happened in the European countries, when they had their peak and they locked down to the tune of about 90 to 95% of the country truly locked down. So they went up and then they came down to baseline. And when I say baseline, I mean literally handfuls of new cases, 10s, 20s, 30s, not hundreds and thousands.
Western governments are accusing hackers believed to be part of the Russian intelligence services of trying to steal information about a coronavirus vaccine. The group APT29, known as Cozy Bear, was also blamed for U.S. election interference. I'm John Trout.
Pandemic information is coming at you so quickly, it's hard to react, never mind plan.
How bad do you think it's going to get?
How much more cutting do you need to do?
Here's help. Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. This update's brought to you by SEI. Challenges highlight one's character, partnership, and resilience. At SEI, they act as one community with their clients. Go to SEIC.com/banks. U.S. stock index futures are rising this morning. Stocks in Europe are little changed as investors weigh the latest corporate earnings against prospects for a stimulus deal that would underpin the region's recovery. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures up 8.5 points. Dow futures up 38. NASDAQ futures up 94. The DAX in Germany's up 0.25%. 10-year Treasury up 3/30 seconds. Yield 0.60%. Yield on the 2-year 0.14%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.8% or 32 cents at $40.43 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.2% or $3 at $18.0330 an ounce. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, the U.S. has shattered its single-day record for coronavirus infections, registering more than 70,000 cases. More states are rolling back reopening measures. The U.S. and other Western governments are accusing hackers believed to be part of the Russian intelligence service of trying to steal information about a coronavirus vaccine. The FBI has opened an investigation into a hacking attack against Twitter that affected some of the world's highest profile accounts. Hackers hijacked accounts to obtain about $120,000 in Bitcoin. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thanks, Michael. It's 5:48 on Wall Street. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Day Break. Morgan Stanley was the latest bank to report a record profit, joining Goldman Sachs in capitalizing on rescue measures from the Federal Reserve. Bloomberg's Jonathan Farrow and Shanali Bosick sat down with Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman to talk about the results and his outlook going forward. Let's hear what he had to say.
What we designed was a business that in times of severe stress would be fine, and when markets are very active and volatile, we would still perform very well across the whole investment banking franchise. This was that crisis, and that's what we delivered with a 15+% ROE. So I think it validates the strategy, but it's our strategy. It's not for everybody. This is what we chose. We didn't want to be credit heavy. We want to be flow-based, fee-based, asset-based, and that's what we are.
James, there's been a strong argument over the last week. We've heard from several CEOs of Wall Street institutions on this program that we haven't fully realized the risks around this recession, that fiscal policy has made it more difficult to assess creditworthiness, and there's going to be more pain in the months ahead. James, would you characterize things a little bit differently?
Well, for the economy, it's very hard to tell. I mean, it depends on, how quickly the COVID outbreak that we're seeing across the South and Southwest subsides, how well people coming back to their place of work functions, continued liquidity and stability in the market. So it's too early to tell. But, we're not a credit-centric institution, so for us it's less relevant. But for the marketplace, until people get back to work, you're going to have consumer credit problems. There's no question about that.
James, even corporate America is starting to face bankruptcies at a much faster pace here. We saw Goldman Sachs take an impairment tied to Hertz yesterday, and that's just one bankruptcy. How does the industry start to get ahead of the bankruptcies here?
Well, I don't know that you can get ahead of it. I mean, it's a natural consequence. Small and big businesses struggling when they haven't got clients coming in. I mean, look at the restaurants, look at all the small businesses, the hairdressers and the doctors and the dentists, and before you even get to big companies. So, that's part of why we saw such a massive wave of financing in the last quarter, as a lot of companies got ahead of that and built up stronger balance sheets in anticipation of these tougher times.
I want to talk a little more about the small customer here, given that the E-Trade deal is close to closing here. Yes. Retail traders are front and center in this market and buying Tesla at 340 times earnings. Are they flirting with danger? Is this the top of the market here?
Well, if you can tell me when the top of the market is, I'd be in a different business. So, no, the market reflects, future expectations on earnings, and that's what we have. Retail investors have clearly been more active. We've seen a lot of new investors coming into this market, as we saw whenever there's a period when the market's on fire, which it has been the last couple of months. But no, Tesla should be valued based upon what Tesla's been able to do, and they've created an extraordinary company. So I don't connect those two things.
James, I don't expect to get a price target from you on Tesla anytime soon. I will ask you this, though. Wall Street has seen huge amounts of success in the last couple of months, and it's a question I get asked a lot, so let me ask it of you. What's the best way of explaining that, James, in a moment like this? How Wall Street has done so well in the last couple of months when the economy and the labour market is still pretty much on its knees?
Well, I guess I'm not sure I'd describe it as huge success, Jonathan. I think we and maybe one other bank are the only banks to beat their cost of capital. They've had huge revenues in trading revenues across the street, but they've had huge credit provisions. And what the banking industry has done has been to support corporations that needed support during this crisis. That provided the financing that let those companies stay stable and position themselves for future growth. So in absolute terms, the profitability of Wall Street is actually dramatically down. We have a different business model. That's why we performed the way we did this quarter. But I think if you look at the banking sector, the hits that they're taking, consumer credit, small business credit, corporate credit, the bankruptcies that Sonali was just talking about. So no, I don't think there's a disconnect. I think the banking sector reflects what's going on in the economy.
That's Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman speaking with Bloomberg's Jonathan Farrow and Sonali Basak. And shares of Morgan Stanley posted a healthy gain after that earnings report, up 2.5% in yesterday's session. Karen.
Nathan, thank you. It is 5:53 on Wall Street. It's time for the Bloomberg Law Report. Let's get to the legal stories we're watching this morning from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
More than 5,000 TurboTax customers are suing Intuit, saying they should have been informed that the IRS offers a free online tax filing service. A would-be class action suit accuses Bayer of misleading investors on its deal to acquire Monsanto by not warning about the potential for billion-dollar judgments over Roundup weed killer. California's highest court has delayed the state's bar exam until October. Some law school graduates will be granted temporary licenses until they can take the exam.
Bloomberg Law. Everything you need, all on one legal research platform, including guidance, analysis, and Bloomberg Market Intelligence. Find out more at BloombergLaw.com.
And now another legal story we're watching this morning. The bail hearing for Ghislaine Maxwell ended with a judge ruling she must spend the next year behind bars awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges tied to former boyfriend Jeffrey Epstein. The hearing also offered hints at her defense strategy, with Maxwell's lawyers questioning the credibility and motives of alleged victims. For more on the trial, June Grasso speaks to Bloomberg legal reporter Patricia Hurtado.
Is that kind of attack on the alleged victims, who were teenagers at the time, risky, especially in the Me Too era? Might it backfire at trial?
I covered Harvey Weinstein's trial, and it was a similar kind of approach. And Bill Cosby certainly did it in his trials. So it hasn't been successful in the post-Me Too world. And some of the victims did sue Epstein. There's depositions, there's testimony, they've spoken out. I asked David Boies, the lawyer for Annie Farmer, and he represents other victims. Are you worried about some of these victims that they may get assailed? And are you confident that Annie Farmer will be able to withstand this kind of cross-examination if Maxwell's lawyers go after her? And he said, I'm perfectly confident she's going to stand up just fine. It remains to be seen. It'll be quite a trial because it will be Epstein's top lieutenant that these young women said, I was 14 years old. I was 16 years old. And this lady came up to me and she seemed so nice and she befriended me and she took me into Epstein's world.
Did the defense attorney also try to portray Maxwell as a bit of a victim herself here, which seems like it would be a stretch before a jury?
Well, he indicated that she didn't know anything was going on. That might be an avenue they're going to explore. She didn't know what was going on behind closed doors. I wasn't there. I didn't know it. But secondly, that if there was any involvement, it was because she was an Epstein thrall. Kind of signaled that he was going to raise that. It's going to be more developed, I believe, down the road when these papers get filed and the motions start getting made.
It seems as if the defense attorney was just throwing everything against the wall to see what would stick, even saying that, there were no video or audio tapes of what happened, which is certainly not a requirement.
Right. People make cell phone videos all the time, and now we see what happened to George Floyd, for example. But there is the testimony. These former prosecutors were saying, if you hear the searing account from a woman and the jury assesses whether that person is credible, the story enough is going to be pretty potent evidence before a jury. And the other thing the government says is they have travel records, photographs, and other material that will actually corroborate what these young women said happened, even though it's 25 years old.
And that's Bloomberg legal reporter Patricia Hurtado speaking with June Grasso. Catch more of that interview, plus analysis of the latest legal news by subscribing to the Bloomberg Law Podcast or downloading the show at Bloomberg.com/podcasts. And attorneys can find exceptional legal research and business development tools at BloombergLaw.com. And futures this morning are higher. S&P futures up 8 points, Dow futures up 35, NASDAQ futures up 94. The 10-year Treasury up 4/32, yield 0.60%. The yield on the 2-year 0.13%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.9% or 38 cents at $40.37 a barrel. And COMEX gold is up 0.2% or $3.60 at $18.03.90 an ounce. The euro 1.1412 against the dollar. The yen is at 107.16. And Bloomberg Day Break continues. This is Bloomberg.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday morning by the scruff of the neck. Take this sunshine as an omen and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
When you don't collect nectar points while shopping for your picnic, it can feel like you're missing something. Like your picnic is missing the P. It's like ICNIC, and you're in the local Ark looking for the perfect spot to put your ICNIC blanket and enjoying a glass of Prosecco while eating some margarita pizza. Make the most of your picnic. Don't miss out on a little extra with Nectar. Collect points on your shopping every day. Find our latest offers on the app.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, this is Bloomberg Day Break for Friday, July 17th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
The U.S. shatters its single-day record for coronavirus infections with more than 70,000 cases.
Dr. Anthony Fauci warns states it's time to roll back reopening measures.
A new stimulus plan could be just weeks away. We speak with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
And shares of Netflix slide as subscriber growth stalls.
Governor Cuomo decides today whether New York City enters a phase 4 reopening, plus Georgia's governor sues the mayor of Atlanta over a face mask mandate. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. Tiger Woods made his return to the PGA Tour, and Mets ace Jacob deGrom says he'll be ready to pitch opening day.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Day Break. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Day Break is brought to you by Witham, a forward-thinking advisory and accounting firm helping clients to be in a position of strength in the new reality of business. Learn about their innovative solutions by visiting witham.com.
And U.S. futures are higher this morning, 6:01 on Wall Street. And we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures up 8.5 points. Dow futures up 39. NASDAQ futures up 94. The DAX in Germany's up 1/3%. CAC in Paris down 1/3%. And the FTSE 100 is up 1/3%. Nikkei 225 in Japan was down 0.3%. And the Hang Seng in Hong Kong gained 0.5%. 10-year Treasury up 4/32. Yield 0.60%. The yield on the 2-year 0.13%. NYMEX crude oil's down 1% or 40 cents at $40.35 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.2% or $3.90 at $18.0420 an ounce. The euro 1.1412 against the dollar. The yen 107.15. Nathan.
Well, Karen, the U.S. has shattered its single-day record for coronavirus infections, registering more than 70,000 cases. More states are rolling back reopening measures. Washington state's pushing pause on its plans, and Pennsylvania's imposing fresh restrictions. Dr. Anthony Fauci says it's time for other states to follow suit.
We really got to almost regroup, call a timeout, not necessarily lock down again, but say we've got to do this in a more measured way. We've got to get our arms around this, and we've got to get this controlled.
Fauci spoke on Facebook Live with CEO Mark Zuckerberg. He says too many states reopened too soon.
Florida reopened May 4th. Now it's reporting another day of record fatalities. And Miami Mayor Francis Suarez expects the death rate will continue to rise.
We're at double the number of COVID patients that we were in March, April. We're at the highest level of hospitalization that we've seen throughout this pandemic.
Florida's already rolled back some reopening measures, and in Miami, Suarez says more restrictions could be on the way.
Texas is also reporting its worst day for deaths since the start of the pandemic. For the third straight day, new cases in the state top 10,000. Governor Greg Abbott tells KPRC-TV the outbreak leaves him few options.
What I want to do is to make sure that everyone begins to wear a mask so that we will be able to get COVID-19 under control so that we will not have to shut Texas back down.
Texas is mobilizing overflow space to store bodies as communities anticipate a surge in fatalities. Hospitals and local officials have requested refrigerated trucks and trailers for storing the dead.
Dr. Fauci says he is optimistic a coronavirus treatment will be ready by fall. But when it comes to hopes for a vaccine, a new poll paints a bleak picture. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has that story.
Nearly 2/3 of healthcare industry leaders anticipate the coronavirus pandemic will continue into the second half of 2021 or longer as hopes for a vaccine this year dwindle. According to a Lazard survey of 221 executives and investors across the healthcare industry, the availability of an effective vaccine is the top concern for 71% of the respondents. Almost 3/4 say a vaccine will not be widely available before the second half of 2021. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Day Break.
All right, Charlie, thanks. On Capitol Hill, the push for another coronavirus relief bill is picking up steam. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tells us she's confident a new measure can pass Congress in the coming weeks.
We can't go home without it. And so because of the unemployment insurance expiring and the rest of that, we have to have the legislation. It's been 2 months.